Hello guys, welcome to Supreme Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. Harry collapsed at Diagon Alley and discovered he was heir to 22 noble houses and true king of Britain. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Blood Remembers. The morning started with an argument about socks. Not the kind of argument that meant anything, just Dudley bellowing from the top of the stairs that Harry had somehow, through some undefined act of magical malice, caused his favorite pair of football socks to disappear, and Aunt Petunia shrieking upward in response that she'd told him to keep his door closed, and Uncle Vernon's face going through its usual spectacular range of purples while he tried to eat his breakfast and pretend he lived in a normal house. Harry sat at the kitchen table, ate his toast, and said nothing. He'd gotten very good at that over the years. 2 more days. 2 more days and the Weasleys were picking him up, and he'd be free of Privet Drive for another year. He'd spent the last month doing what he always did, writing letters, reading his textbooks early, running in the mornings because doing something physical stopped him from thinking too hard about Sirius. About the Department of Mysteries. About the way Sirius had laughed, and then hadn't. He pressed that thought down with the practiced ease of someone who'd had a lot of practice pressing things down. The letter from Gringotts arrived with breakfast, delivered by a small, officious-looking barn owl that dropped the envelope directly onto his plate and then left without waiting for a treat, which told Harry something about the sender's general attitude toward niceties. Mr. H. Potter, the letter read, in the precise, slightly aggressive script that goblins apparently used for everything. You are hereby notified that your presence is required at Gringotts Bank, London, at your earliest convenience, for the purpose of a comprehensive inheritance assessment, as mandated under the Goblin Banking Accord of 1752, Section 14, Clause 7, all accounts held in trust shall undergo full assessment upon the account holder's 16th birthday. This is not a request. Harry read it twice, then folded it and put it in his pocket. He'd turned 16 2 weeks ago. He hadn't thought much about it. Birthdays at the Dursleys weren't exactly celebrated events, but apparently Gringotts had. He wrote to Hermione and Ron that afternoon. Hermione wrote back within the hour, which meant she'd been sitting near her owl, and her letter was 3 pages long and covered everything she knew about inheritance assessments, which was, characteristically, quite a lot. The short version: it was standard procedure for wizarding heirs, it involved a blood ritual that identified any familial or noble claims, and it was binding, meaning whatever the test revealed became official goblin record and couldn't be disputed by anyone. You should go as soon as possible, she'd written. And Harry, take someone with you. Neville's had his done already. Ask him what to expect. Ron's letter arrived an hour later and said, Mom says she'll take you to Diagon Alley whenever you want. Bill says inheritance assessments are usually boring. Probably nothing to worry about. Probably nothing to worry about. Harry read that line several times and decided that, given his general track record with probably nothing, he should go immediately. He went 4 days later, on a Tuesday morning so overcast the whole of London looked like it had given up. Mrs. Weasley had fussed over him at the leaky cauldron, straightened his collar, smoothed down his hair, then given up on the hair with the resigned expression of someone accepting a fundamental truth, and then he'd stepped through into Diagon Alley with Ron and Hermione at his sides, and for a moment everything felt almost normal. Almost. There were fewer people than usual. The shops that were open had a slightly desperate brightness to them, like they were trying too hard, and several storefronts had the particular blankness of spaces recently vacated. 2 witches near Madame Malkin spoke in the low, careful voices people use when they think they might be overheard. A child walking with her father kept looking up at the sky. Voldemort had been back officially for over a month now. The prophet had finally admitted it, after Dumbledore's confrontation with Fudge at the Ministry. The world hadn't ended, but it had quietly rearranged itself into something more frightened and less certain. It's getting worse, Hermione said quietly. Yeah. Harry didn't have anything better than that. They walked to Gringotts. The bank was exactly as Harry remembered it, massive, white, imperious, staffed by goblins who regarded every human customer with the faint contempt of beings who had been managing other people's money for centuries and found the experience consistently disappointing. Harry approached the nearest available teller, a goblin with extremely long fingers and a nameplate that read Griphook Jr., and said he had an appointment for an inheritance assessment. The goblin's eyes flicked to him. Then to a ledger. Then back to him with an expression Harry couldn't quite read. "Name," the goblin said. "Harry Potter." A pause. Not a long pause, maybe 2 seconds, but in goblin terms, Harry suspected that was equivalent to dropping a tray in a restaurant. The goblin looked at the ledger again, then at Harry, and then said, very precisely, "1 moment," and disappeared through a door behind the counter. "That's odd," Hermione murmured. "Goblins are always odd," Ron said. "No, they're usually rude and efficient. They don't just disappear. They waited." Around them, the bank conducted its business with its usual echoing grandeur, coins, voices, the distant rumble of carts somewhere deep below. 3 minutes passed. Then 5. Harry watched the door the goblin had gone through and felt the small, familiar prickling at the back of his neck that had kept him alive through 5 years of increasingly dangerous situations. A different goblin came out. Older, gray-skinned, wearing robes of considerably better quality than the teller's, with the kind of expression that suggested he made decisions rather than carried them out. "Mr. Potter," he said. "I am Ragnuk, Senior Account Manager for the Potter accounts. Please come with me. Just me, or, your companions may wait in the anteroom." Ragnuk's tone left little room for negotiation, but Harry caught the slight flicker of something. Was that nervousness in a goblin? And decided not to push it. He glanced at Hermione. She gave him a look that said, "I'll be right here, and if anything goes wrong I'll burn this bank to the ground," or at least that was how Harry chose to interpret it. Ron gave him a thumbs up. Harry followed Ragnuk. They went down. Not into the cart tunnels, but through a corridor Harry hadn't seen before, marble floors, torchlight, the walls carved with something that might have been goblin script or might have been much older than that. The air got heavier the further down they went, not unpleasantly, but with the particular density of spaces that held a great deal of magic in a small area. The room they arrived at was circular and completely bare except for a stone table in the center, a shallow bowl carved directly into its surface, and a single goblin standing at its far side who introduced herself as Iron Teeth without looking up from the parchment she was studying. "The ritual is simple," Ragnuk said. 3 drops of blood into the basin. The assessment takes approximately 4 minutes. The results are transcribed automatically." He paused. "It is worth noting that in our combined 800 years of conducting these assessments, we have never had one take longer than 6 minutes. "Okay," Harry said. He took the small silver knife Iron Teeth offered, made a small cut on his palm, he'd done it before for worse reasons, and let 3 drops fall into the bowl. The blood hit the stone and spread, which was normal. It glowed faintly gold, which was apparently also normal, because neither goblin moved. Words began to form in the spreading light, names, house names, lineage lines, and Ragnuk began reading them aloud in a low, professional tone. "House Potter, primary heir, confirmed. House Peveril, heir by descent, confirmed. House Gryffindor," a pause. "House Gryffindor, heir by descent, confirmed." Iron Teeth made a noise. Harry looked at her. She was staring at the basin. "House Slytherin," Ragnuk continued, and his voice had changed, just slightly, as if he were reading something he'd expected to be interesting and found it was something else entirely. "Heir by conquest and magical compact, confirmed." "Wait," Harry said. "Slytherin? But Voldemort, the killing curse and your subsequent survival constituted a magical duel under ancient law," Ragnuk said, not looking up. "The last scion of Slytherin attempted to kill you twice and failed. Under the Compact of 993, that transfers heirship. This is unusual. But the law is the law." He kept reading. "House Ravenclaw, heir by descent, confirmed. House Hufflepuff, heir by descent. The golden light in the basin was getting brighter. Harry realized his hands were shaking slightly and made them stop. House Merlin, Ragnarok said, and then Ragnarok stopped, and for a long moment the only sound in the room was the increasingly loud hum coming from the basin itself. House Merlin, primary heir, that can't be right, Ironteeth said, and Harry had the feeling that goblins almost never said that. It's in the record, Ragnarok said. House Merlin hasn't had a living heir in 312 years. I'm aware. Ragnarok straightened his robes. His voice was very controlled now, the way voices get when the person using them is working hard to stay professional. He kept reading. House Emery's. House Black, but they already knew about that. House Flemont. House Prevel, secondary claim. House Gaunt, by conquest. The basin was humming audibly now, the golden light bright enough that Harry was squinting slightly. Each name that came up sat in the air and pulsed before settling. The room felt thick with something, not dark, not light, just old. Older than the room they were standing in. Older than Gringotts itself. Then the last name came up. Harry saw it reflected in Ragnarok's eyes before the goblin spoke it, because the light went from gold to white, sudden and total, and the humming became a sound Harry felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears, and Ironteeth stepped back from the table, and Ragnarok, who had managed 8 centuries of banking with complete composure, took one very small, very deliberate breath before he said, House Pendragon. Primary heir. Royal claim confirmed. And the room exploded. Not with fire or force, with light, pure and searing, and the sound that came with it was less an explosion and more the sensation of something vast waking up after a very long sleep, shaking dust from itself, stretching. Harry felt it hit him like a physical impact, not painful, but total, like being submerged in something that moved through every part of him at once. He heard Ragnarok saying his name, and Ironteeth calling for someone, and distantly, through the walls, he heard the bank's protective wards activating, and he thought, with the peculiar clarity of someone right on the edge of consciousness, there's that prickling again. Then the floor came up to meet him, and Harry Potter, heir to 22 noble and most ancient houses, true king of magical Britain by blood and right and law older than the ministry by 1,000 years, passed out on the floor of Gringotts Bank. He came back to consciousness slowly, in pieces. First the ceiling, high, stone, with veins of something metal-like running through it that caught the torchlight. Then the awareness that he was horizontal, on something softer than the floor had been. Then voices, low and deliberate, just outside the range of understanding. He listened without opening his eyes, because that was another skill he'd developed over the years. Unprecedented in every living record, a voice was saying, deep and very precise, with the particular cadence of someone who chose every word individually. The last Pendragon heir died in 1692. The line was believed extinguished. Believed. A second voice, older and rougher. Goblins don't deal in belief. The magic in the basin has never, ever, produced a royal seal. I've conducted these assessments for 90 years. I've heard of it happening twice in our history. Twice. And now it's happened. A short silence. And now it's happened, the deep voice agreed. The question is what we do with it. We do what the accord requires, the older voice said flatly. We inform the account holder. We facilitate the claims. We do not make political decisions. We have not survived 3,000 years of human politics by making political decisions. I know, Ragnarok. Harry's brain registered the name. Not Ragnarok, the account manager. Ragnarok. The director. The head of Gringotts itself. He opened his eyes. The room was different, larger, warmer, with dark wood furnishings that looked like they hadn't been updated since sometime around the 11th century and several bookshelves absolutely heaving with ledgers. 2 goblins stood near the door, talking. Ragnarok, Harry knew it was him because he was the most impressively unimpressed-looking person Harry had ever seen, including Professor Snape, was taller than most goblins, grey-bearded, with eyes like old bronze. Beside him was Ragnarok, who was watching Harry with an expression that was carefully neutral and only partially succeeding. "You're awake," Ragnarok said. He said it the way you'd say the weather has changed, as a simple fact requiring acknowledgement, no more. "Apparently," Harry said. He sat up. His head felt perfectly clear, which surprised him. He'd expected the thundering headache that usually accompanied magical overload. Instead he felt almost preternaturally alert, like someone had turned up the contrast on the world by 30%. "How long was I out?" 14 minutes. "Right." Harry put his feet on the floor. The stone was cool through his socks. "I heard you talking." "The Pendragon line." Ragnarok's eyebrows moved approximately 2 millimeters, which Harry would later understand was the goblin equivalent of visible shock. "Your hearing is sharp. I've had to listen through doors a lot." Harry looked at his hands. Nothing visible, nothing different. He felt different, but he couldn't have said how, exactly. Like something that had been sitting very still inside him for a long time had simply stood up. 22 houses. 22 noble and most ancient houses, yes, Ragnarok said, recovering his professional composure like it was a dropped pen. "The full assessment transcript is, start with Pendragon," Harry said. Ragnarok studied him for a moment. It was the kind of study that took stock, assessed, categorized. Harry looked back steadily and waited. "Sit down, Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said, and pulled up a chair himself, which was apparently significant enough that Ragnarok's expression flickered. "This will take some time." The story Ragnarok told him wasn't a comfortable one, and Ragnarok told it without any apparent interest in making it comfortable, which Harry appreciated. The Pendragon bloodline, the real one, not the legend that had soaked into Muggle history like ink into paper, was the oldest continuous magical dynasty in British history. Arthur Pendragon had been real. Not the sword in the stone fairy tale, not the round table as mythology had preserved it, but the man, a wizard king who had unified the magical tribes of Britain under a single accord in the 5th century, established the first formal laws governing magical society, and created the framework that would eventually, very eventually, after much bloodshed and revision, become the Wisengamot itself. The Pendragon kings had ruled openly for 4 centuries. Then the Statute of Secrecy debates began, not the 1692 statute most wizards learned about, but the first ones, centuries earlier, when the magical world was slowly retreating from Muggle sight under the pressure of growing Muggle kingdoms and the first stirrings of the persecution that would eventually become the Inquisition. The last Pendragon king had made a choice. He'd hidden the lineage. Split it across several families, buried the main bloodline under layers of legal obfuscation and false ancestry, and then gone underground. Not vanished, hidden. The Pendragon claim had sat dormant inside a lineage that had eventually, through marriage and time and the entirely unpredictable nature of inheritance, ended up in a young woman named Euphemia Flemont, who had married one Fleamont Potter. Who had a son named James. Who had a son named Harry. The royal claim doesn't activate by inheritance alone, Ragnarok said. It requires a confluence. The right bloodline, yes, but also a demonstration of magical power sufficient to satisfy the compact. The original Pendragon Compact, written in 499 AD, specifies that the heir must have, quote, stood against death and turned it aside through the power of their own blood. The goblin's old eyes met Harry's. You survived the killing curse as an infant. In the eyes of ancient law, you satisfied the compact before you were old enough to walk. The room was very quiet. The compact has been waiting, Harry said slowly. For 15 years, yes. It required only the blood test to activate it formally. Ragnarok laced his long fingers together. Which brings us to the question of what happens now. What are my options? Harry asked. Ragnarok looked at him with something that might, in a different face, have been respect. Most humans who reach this point ask us, what does this mean? You ask for options. Knowing what it means doesn't help me if I can't do anything with it. What are my options? Ragnarok almost smiled. You may decline the Pendragon claim. Formally renounce it. The other 21 houses are binding, you cannot release those, they are blood-tied, but the royal claim requires active acceptance. You have 30 days to decide. And if I accept it? Then you become, in the eyes of magical law, the oldest magical law, predating the Ministry of Magic by roughly 900 years, the rightful sovereign of magical Britain. He said it levelly, without drama. The Ministry will not like this. The Wisengamot will not like this. Several very powerful people will immediately begin working to discredit, neutralize, or eliminate you. So, Tuesday, Harry said. Ragnarok made a sound that might have been a stifled laugh. Ragnarok looked at Harry for another long moment. The crown does not give you an army, Ragnarok said. It does not give you the right to override magical law unilaterally. What it gives you is standing. Legal, historical, and magical standing that supersedes the authority of any post-statute institution, including the ministry. In the right hands, wielded intelligently, that standing is, he paused, choosing the word carefully. Considerable. What would you do? Harry asked. If you were me. I would accept, Ragnarok said immediately, without hesitation, and that more than anything told Harry that the goblin had already decided what he thought. Not because of power. Because the alternative is that it goes back to sleep, and everything that is currently wrong with this country continues to be wrong, and another generation suffers for it. Harry looked down at his hands again. He thought about Sirius, who had spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime he didn't commit, in a system that hadn't cared to check. He thought about Neville's parents, in St. Mungo's, staring at nothing. He thought about a graveyard in Little Hangleton and a man who thought himself a god because no one had ever had the nerve to tell him he wasn't. He thought about Dumbledore, who had placed him in Privet Drive and given the Dursleys no reason, no magic, no obligation, no oversight, to treat him as anything other than a problem to be managed. He thought about all the years of being the boy who lived, the symbol, the weapon, the kept thing on a shelf to be used when needed. And then he thought about how it had felt when the white light hit him. Not the collapse, before that, in the split second before his body gave out. That feeling of something vast and old recognizing him. Not choosing him, recognizing him. Like a door opening that had always been his door, that had been waiting all along. He looked up at Ragnarok. I accept, Harry said. The director of Gringotts Bank nodded once, slowly, with the gravity of someone witnessing the hinge point of a historical era. Then there is something you need to see, he said. Something that has been waiting even longer than the compact. They went deeper. Past the cart tunnels, past the subvaults, into a level of the bank that Ragnarok told Harry quietly most goblins never visited in their lifetimes. The air here was not cold, it was still, with the profound stillness of things preserved against the natural decay of time. The walls were carved stone, and the carvings were not decorative. They were a history. Harry caught fragments as they passed, battles, councils, men and women with their hands raised in gestures that looked like either magic or surrender or both, but didn't slow down to read them. The door at the end of the corridor was not impressive. That was the first thing Harry noticed. Given everything, the depth, the age, the weight of the air, he'd expected something dramatic. Instead it was maybe 8 feet tall, plain stone, with a single handprint carved into its center. The Pendragon vault, Ragnarok said. It has not been opened in 312 years. It will only open for the confirmed heir. Harry stepped forward, placed his hand over the carved print. The stone was warm. Immediately, warmly, as if it had been waiting with its breath held and had just let it out. The door opened inward without a sound. The vault beyond was not large. There was no mountain of gold, no overflowing treasure chests. There was a long table, dark wood, ancient, with the scarred dignity of something that had been used for real work rather than display, and on it, arranged with great care, 6 items. A crown. Not elaborate, a simple band of dark metal, silver black, set with a single stone the color of deep water. A ring. Signet, heavy, with the Pendragon seal. A sword. Shorter than Harry expected, plain hilted, with no visible magic about it except that it sat perfectly still in a way most objects didn't. A book. Very old, handwritten, with a cover of something that was probably leather and probably not the conventional kind. A cloak, dark green, folded neatly. And a letter, with his name on it in a handwriting he didn't recognize. Harry picked up the letter first, because that was what you did. It was dated 1692. The handwriting was sharp and a little impatient, the handwriting of someone who writes fast because they have too many things to say. To the heir who comes after me, it began. I don't know your name or your face or what kind of world you've inherited. If the compact has activated, then you've survived something that should have killed you, which means you're either very lucky or very strong or both. I hope both. The crown doesn't make you a king. The blood doesn't make you a king. What makes you a king is the choice to be responsible for people who didn't ask for your protection and probably won't thank you for it. If you're looking for gratitude, put the ring back on the table and walk away. If you're not, if you understand that this was never about glory, then welcome. There is a war in every generation. Ours always comes. The sword is called Caledulch. You might know it by another name. It won't respond to pride or anger. It will respond to purpose. You'll understand when you hold it. The book is the Pendragon Compact in full. Read it. All of it. Especially the parts that are boring. The boring parts are the important ones. The cloak is a gift from a grateful country that no longer exists in the form I knew it. It will protect you from things I hope you never face. The crown is the last thing you put on, not the first. Do what I couldn't. Finish it. Selim Pendragon, King of Magical Britain, last of the line, or so I thought. Harry folded the letter and put it in his pocket alongside the Gringotts notice. He looked at the sword for a long moment, then picked it up. It was lighter than it should have been and heavier than it looked, both at once, which stopped making sense and started making meaning the moment he wrapped his hand around the hilt. The purpose thing, the letter had been right. He felt it immediately, not as a tingling or a flash of magic, but as a kind of alignment, like two things that were built to fit together finally fitting. The sword felt like it had been waiting to be useful. All right, Harry said quietly, to the vault, to the history carved into the walls, to the memory of a king who'd lived 300 years ago and still managed to have opinions about him. All right. He set the sword down carefully. Turned to Ragnarok, who had waited in the doorway with the patience of someone who had done a great deal of waiting and had made peace with it. I need to tell my friends, Harry said. Yes. And then there are some conversations I need to have with some people who are going to be very unhappy about all of this. Yes, Ragnarok said again. The vault. These items, they belong to you. They go where you go. A pause. The crown, however, Ragnarok gestured at it with a slight incline of his head. I would advise waiting on the crown. Not because of our recommendation, but because of the letters. You will know when. Harry nodded. He looked around the vault once more, at the ancient table, at the history of a bloodline that had been hiding inside his own for 15 years, at the letter from a dead king who had somehow known exactly what to say. One more question, he said. Ask. Did Dumbledore know about this? The pause before Ragnarok's answer was approximately 1 second. In goblin terms, Harry was beginning to understand, that meant the answer was complicated. The Dumbledore account has made several inquiries about the Pendragon bloodline over the past 40 years, Ragnarok said, with the careful precision of someone being accurate rather than complete. The nature of those inquiries is protected by banking law. What I can tell you is that the inquiries stopped approximately 16 years ago. 16 years ago. Harry had been born 15 years ago. Thank you, Harry said. His voice was very steady. He walked out of the vault, back down the ancient corridor, up through the levels of the bank, carrying a sword that felt like a purpose and a letter from a dead king, back toward the surface and the world he was going to change. Ron and Hermione were in the anteroom, Hermione sitting rigid with barely contained anxiety and Ron working through what appeared to be his third cup of complimentary goblin tea. They both stood when Harry came through the door. Hermione's eyes went immediately to the sword. "Harry," she said carefully, "why are you carrying a sword?" "Long story." He looked at both of them, Ron's open, worried face, Hermione's already calculating expression, and felt something clear and warm in his chest. "I need to tell you both some things." "Not here." "Is it bad?" Ron asked. Harry thought about it honestly. "Depends on who you ask." "Are you okay?" "Yeah," Harry said, and meant it in a way he hadn't expected to. "Actually, yeah. I am." He looked back at the door he'd come through, then at the main doors of the bank, at Diagon Alley beyond. The overcast sky. The too quiet street. The world that was frightened and uncertain and waiting for something to change. "I'm going to need you both. If you're in." "Obviously," Ron said, as if this were a stupid question. Hermione just looked at him steadily. She could see something in his face, Harry knew, she'd always been able to read him better than he read himself. Whatever she saw made her exhale slowly, and nod, and say, "Tell us everything." "I will," Harry said. But first, he glanced at Ragnar, who had appeared at the doorway and stood there with the quiet of someone who had one more thing to say. "There's someone else I need to talk to today. Someone who's been keeping things from me for a while." He wasn't angry, saying it. That surprised him. He'd expected anger, had felt the ghost of it rising when Ragnar had said those words, 16 years ago, but what was actually there was something quieter and more permanent. A decision. Ragnar inclined his head. "The director of Gringotts recognizes the king of magical Britain," he said, and his voice carried no irony and no theatricality, just the weight of law and history settling into place like a keystone into an arch. "Gringotts will be available for whatever you require." Harry looked at him. "Thank you, Ragnar." "Don't thank us yet," the old goblin said. "Thank us when you've won." Harry almost smiled. He turned to his friends, sword in hand, letter in his pocket, 22 noble inheritances settling through his blood like heat after cold, and the particular calm of someone who has just understood exactly who they are and what they're going to do about it. "Come on," he said. "We've got a lot of work to do." Chapter 2, The Weight of Old Names. They found a booth at the back of the leaky cauldron, far enough from the bar that Tom couldn't hear them, close enough to the door that Harry could see anyone coming in. He'd started sitting with his back to walls without noticing when the habit formed. Probably around second year. Hermione had her notebook out before they'd even ordered. Ron had ordered anyway, because Ron understood that serious conversations went better with food, which was one of the things Harry genuinely valued about him. Harry put the sword on the table. It sat there between the salt cellar and Hermione's pumpkin juice with a kind of quiet dignity, as if it were used to more impressive tables and was tolerating this one. "Start from the beginning," Hermione said. So Harry did. He told it straight, the way Ragnar had told him, no editorializing, no softening, just the sequence of events in order. The blood test. The names coming up. The light. The vault and the letter. Selim Pendragon's voice reaching 300 years forward through dried ink and old paper. He told them about the 22 houses. Hermione's quill was moving the whole time, which meant she was processing rather than recording. She only wrote when she was thinking hard. Ron listened with the focused expression he got during chess, tracking pieces. When Harry finished, the booth was quiet for a moment. "Gryffindor," Hermione said first. "And Slytherin. And the Founders' other 2 lines. You're heir to all 4 Founders. Apparently. And Merlin. And Pendragon." Hermione stared at her notebook. Then she looked up. "Harry, do you understand what the political implications of this are?" "I'm starting to." The Waisengamot has 28 seats reserved for noble and most ancient houses. You now hold legal claim to, she counted quickly. Potentially 16 of those seats, depending on which houses have living alternates and which are fully extinct. 16, Harry. The current sitting majority is 15 votes. You could theoretically restructure the entire Waisengamot just by showing up. I know. And the Pendragon claim supersedes ministry authority entirely under pre-statute law, I know, Hermione. She looked at him carefully. Then, quietly, you're not scared. No. Ron leaned forward. Should he be? He should be something, Hermione said, but not critically. She was studying Harry the way she studied things she was trying to understand, not judge. Most people, finding this out, most people haven't had Voldemort in their head and a prophecy over their crib, Harry said simply. I'm not being reckless. I'm not planning to walk into the ministry tomorrow and declare myself king. But I'm also not going to, he paused, finding the words. I spent 15 years being managed. Being placed and moved and kept. Someone decided where I'd live, what I'd know, when I was ready for information about my own life. That's done. The table was quiet again. Ron said, Mate. The bit about Dumbledore. The inquiries about the Pendragon line stopping when you were born. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily mean, I know it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Harry turned the Caledulch over in his hands, he'd picked it up without thinking about it, which the sword seemed perfectly fine with. But I'm going to ask him. Directly. And I'm going to know if he's lying. How? Hermione asked. Because I've watched him deflect for 5 years and I know what it looks like. He set the sword down. First, though. The other houses. There's something Ragnarok said that I keep coming back to. He looked at Hermione. You said Neville's done his inheritance assessment. Hermione's expression shifted slightly. Yes. He said it was, he said there was more than he expected. He didn't elaborate. I think I know why. Harry had been thinking about this since the vault. The Longbottom line. One of the 22 houses on my list was House Longbottom, but listed as a collateral claim, not primary. Meaning Neville's the primary heir and I have a secondary connection through an old family compact. But Ragnarok said something about dormant activations, that my assessment reactivating the Pendragon line could trigger sympathetic responses in closely allied houses. He looked at both of them. Neville needs to know. He needs to know regardless, Hermione said firmly. He's our friend and this affects him. We're writing to him today. We're doing more than writing. She closed her notebook with a decisive snap. Harry, you need to understand the full scope of what you have access to right now, and you need to understand it before Dumbledore or the Ministry or anyone else starts managing the narrative. Ragnarok, can you go back? Get the full documents? He said I could come back anytime. Then we go back this afternoon. She glanced at Ron. And we need someone who actually knows wizarding political history. Your dad, Ron. He knows how the Waisengamot operates. Dad will, Ron started, then stopped. He'll want to tell Mum. Mrs. Weasley will want to protect me, Harry said. Which means she'll want to slow this down. Which means she'll tell Dumbledore. Ron's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't argue with it. That was perhaps the most telling thing. I'll talk to Dad alone first, Ron said. He can keep things quiet when he needs to. People underestimate him because he likes Muggle stuff, but he's been in the Ministry for 20 years. He knows where all the bodies are buried, politically speaking. Okay, Harry said. But Ron, I need to know if he thinks I should stop. Not for political reasons, but his honest opinion. Will he give me that? Ron met his eyes. Yeah. He will. Harry nodded. He picked up his drink, which had gone slightly warm, and drank half of it. Outside the grimy window of the leaky cauldron, London went about its Tuesday, entirely unaware that somewhere beneath the feet of its citizens, in a vault older than the city itself, a line of kings had just woken up. "Right," he said. "Let's go learn what we own." Ragnarok assigned them a conference room this time, a proper one, with a long table and multiple goblins who came in rotation carrying documents, ledgers, and rolls of parchment long enough to carpet a hallway. Hermione took notes with the focused intensity of someone simultaneously reading, processing, and filing 3 streams of information. Ron kept a separate tally on a smaller parchment that turned out to be, when Harry looked at it, a rough map of political alliances. The scope of it was, Harry had to admit, genuinely staggering. Not just the vaults, though the vaults were staggering in their own right, years of accumulated wealth from 22 family lines, some of which had been quietly adding interest since the 15th century, but the properties. 14 estates across Britain and Ireland. 2 manors in France. A tower in Scotland that Ragnarok described with the faint reverence of someone who appreciated significant architecture. Properties held in trust, properties held in full ownership, properties that had been sitting empty and maintained by standing household enchantments for decades, waiting. This one, Hermione said, tapping a document about a property in the West Country. Potter's End. This is the original Potter estate. Not Godric's Hollow, that was a secondary residence. This is where your family came from, Harry. Harry looked at the entry. Potter's End, Somerset. 14 bedrooms, grounds of 40 acres, built 1432, last inhabited, his finger moved down the page, 1981. The year his parents died. It's been empty for 15 years, he said. Fully maintained, the goblin across the table, a young, precise one named Sharpclaw, told him. The household wards renew automatically. It is in excellent condition. A pause. The standing instructions left by the late Lord Potter were that the estate should be maintained in readiness for the heir's return. Harry looked at that sentence for a moment. In readiness for the heir's return. His father had written that, at some point. His father, who had died at 21, had left standing instructions that the house should be kept ready, as if he'd imagined a future where someone would come back to it. Harry did not let himself sit with that for long, because sitting with things tended to freeze him and he had too much to do. I want to visit, he said. Soon. Not today, but soon. Of course, Sharpclaw said, and made a note. They worked through the afternoon. By 4 o'clock, Hermione had filled 2.5 notebooks and had the expression she got when she encountered a problem whose solution required her to revise multiple prior assumptions, stretched, intent, almost thrumming with the need to reorganize everything she thought she knew. Ron's political map had grown considerably and now had a system of color-coded dots that he explained with impressive clarity when Harry asked. Blue dots are families who'll support you because they've always believed in traditional power structures and you're the most legitimately traditional claimant in 1,000 years. Red dots are families who'll oppose you because they've gotten comfortable with the current system and you threaten that. Yellow is complicated. Old families who might go either way. The Knotts, the Parkinsons, the Zabinas. They're not Death Eaters, most of them, but they're not friends either. He tapped a cluster of dots near the center. The interesting ones are here. Families that are currently aligned with Voldemort who might reconsider if they thought the war was genuinely going to go the other way. They're not ideological, they're survivalists. They backed the winning side last time. If they think you're the winning side, that's exactly the kind of thinking we need to be doing, Hermione said from behind her notebook. Harry, you have to understand, Voldemort's appeal to the old families isn't purely fear. Part of it is that he represents old power, old blood, old order. A king, a legitimate king with a deeper bloodline than anyone alive, completely reframes that. She looked up. You're not just a rival to him. You make his entire ideological framework incoherent. Harry filed that away. The last document Sharpclaw placed on the table was a sealed folder with a single word on the cover, Disclosures. What's this? Harry asked. Sharpclaw's expression was the precise goblin version of neutral that Harry was learning meant something was complicated. In the course of preparing your account assessment, certain financial activities pertaining to your accounts were reviewed. Some of these activities predate your majority and were conducted under third-party authorization. A pause. You are entitled to a full accounting. Harry opened the folder. The first page was a summary of monthly withdrawals from the Potter Vault beginning in November 1981, 1 month after his parents' deaths. The withdrawals were modest individually, 50 galleons here, 100 there, but they were consistent. Monthly. For 14 years. They had stopped in the summer before Harry's 5th year, which was also when a significant one-time withdrawal of 5,000 galleons had been made. The authorized signatory on every single transaction was Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Order of Merlin First Class, Supreme Mugwump, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. The room was very quiet. Harry looked at the pages for a long time. Ron, who had leaned over to read, had gone still. Hermione had closed her notebook. What were the funds used for? Harry asked. Gringotts does not track expenditure once funds leave the bank, Sharpclaw said. We can confirm only what was withdrawn. Is it possible they went to, Hermione started, carefully. To the Dursleys? For Harry's upkeep? Then why stop? Ron said flatly. If it was for Harry's care, why stop when he turned 14? Nobody had an answer for that. Harry turned to the next page. There was a second section, smaller withdrawals, from the Black family account, beginning after Sirius's death. The signatory there was Dumbledore again, holding power of attorney as chief warlock in the absence of other recognized heirs. Those had continued until Gringotts' reassessment 3 days ago had transferred the Black account to Harry as primary heir. Harry closed the folder. Set it down carefully. Right, he said. His voice was completely even. I'd like to take all of this with me. Of course, Sharpclaw said. And I'd like to formally request that no further third-party access to any of my accounts be possible without my personal authorization. Starting immediately. That can be arranged by end of day. Good. Harry picked up the folder, put it in the bag Hermione had been using for documents, and stood up. We're done here for today. Thank you, Sharpclaw. Please pass my appreciation to Director Ragnarok. The goblin inclined his head with something that was probably the closest thing to warmth Harry had seen from any of them. The king's business is Gringotts' business, Sharpclaw said simply. Harry shouldered the bag, picked up Caledulch, and walked out of the conference room. He moved at a normal pace, with a normal expression. If you'd been watching, you wouldn't have seen anything that looked like fury, and you would have been misled. They were back in Diagon Alley when Hermione said, quietly, Harry. I know. There might be an explanation, there might be. I'm going to give him the chance to give me one. He stopped walking, turned to face her. I'm not going to storm in there and, Hermione, I'm not angry in the way that makes you do stupid things. I'm angry in the way that makes you very careful. He looked at her steadily. I need you to trust that. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, okay. I trust that. Good. He started walking again. Now, the letter to Neville. I want to write it tonight, and I want to be specific. Not just about what happened in Gringotts, but about what I think is going on with his line. If the Longbottom inheritance activated sympathetically, he'd be feeling it, Ron said. Like pressure. Or a change in how his magic feels. He glanced at Harry. Like you felt when you picked up the sword. Harry looked down at Caledulch in his hand. The alignment feeling was still there, quiet and constant, like a compass needle that had found north and settled. Yeah. Like that. Then he already knows something's happening. Ron pulled out his wand, checked the street with the careful habit they'd all developed. Neville's not daft, Harry. He's going to have questions. I want him to have questions. I want him in this. Harry was very certain about that. Whatever I'm building, and I'm building something, that much I know, I'm not building it without the people I trust. Neville, Luna. Ron and Hermione said together, in the particular harmony of two people who trust someone they also find deeply unpredictable. Luna knows things, Harry said simply. They didn't argue with this because they couldn't. The letter to Neville went out that evening from Hermione's owl, which was more reliable than Hedwig for discretion since nobody was monitoring Hermione's correspondence yet. Harry wrote it himself, longhand, in plain language. He didn't use codes were for people who were hiding. He told Neville what had happened, what it meant, and ended with, I need people I trust. If you're in, come to the Leaky Cauldron on Thursday morning. If you want to think about it first, I understand. But Neville, check your magic. Something may be waking up. The reply came back in under 2 hours. I felt it 3 days ago. Like something knocked on a door inside me and then stood there waiting. I didn't know what it was. I'll be there Thursday. NPS Gran is going to be absolutely furious with both of us, and I mean that as a compliment. Harry laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised him, and passed the letter to Ron, who read it and grinned, and to Hermione, who smiled in the specific way she smiled when something she'd hoped for turned out to be true. They went to Hogwarts the next morning. Not by Flo, not by Owl, Harry simply walked up to the gates with Ron and Hermione, which is perhaps the most telling measure of how much had changed in 24 hours. The gates opened automatically for him, which they'd done before, but there was something different about the quality of the opening, a recognition rather than a grudging admission, like a house acknowledging its owner rather than a visitor. Hermione noticed. She didn't say anything, but Harry caught her glancing at the gates as they swung shut behind them. Dumbledore's office. The stone gargoyle. Harry said, "Sherbet lemon," out of habit, and then felt briefly stupid, but the gargoyle moved anyway. They rode the spiral staircase up. Harry knocked. "Come in," said Dumbledore's voice, with the particular note in it that Harry now recognized as Dumbledore being unsurprised by things he probably should have been surprised by. The office was exactly as Harry remembered it, instruments whirring gently on their plinths, portraits of former headmasters watching from the walls, Fawkes the Phoenix on his perch. Dumbledore himself stood at the window with his back to the room, looking out over the grounds, his half-moon spectacles catching the morning light. "Harry," he said. "And Ronald, Hermione. Please sit down." He turned from the window, and Harry studied his face with new eyes, not searching for warmth or guidance, but simply reading it. What he saw was a man who had already been told, or had already surmised, that something significant had happened in Gringotts yesterday. "You know," Harry said. It wasn't accusatory. It was just a fact being confirmed. "I received word last night that there had been an unusual event during a standard inheritance assessment," Dumbledore said carefully. He settled into his chair with the grace of someone very old who moved deliberately. "I did not know the specifics. But you could guess." Dumbledore's blue eyes were steady on Harry's. "I had certain concerns about what an assessment might reveal, yes. Because you'd been looking into the Pendragon bloodline for 40 years, Harry said. And you stopped around the time I was born." A pause. Around them, the headmaster's office did its usual quiet things, instruments ticking, fire crackling, Fawkes making a low sound and tilting his head. Behind Harry, he was aware of Hermione sitting very still and Ron doing the same. "That is," Dumbledore began. "True," Harry said. "It's true, isn't it?" "Yes," Dumbledore said, and in that single syllable Harry heard the slight, careful deflation of a man who had decided not to deny the thing he couldn't deny. "Yes, Harry. I knew of the possibility. I did not know it was a certainty. But you knew enough to stop looking." Harry leaned forward slightly. "You knew enough that when I was born, when a child survived the killing curse, which is exactly the condition the Pendragon Compact requires, you decided to stop asking questions about an ancient royal bloodline." Dumbledore was quiet. "Why?" Harry asked. Just that. Not angry, not demanding, genuinely asking, with the openness of someone who might actually accept the answer if it was a good one. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, the way he so rarely did, straight on, without the gentle deflection of wisdom and metaphor. What Harry saw on the old man's face wasn't guilt, exactly, but something adjacent. The expression of someone who had made a decision they believed was correct and was now being asked to explain it to the person most affected by it. Because I was afraid, Dumbledore said. In 16 years of interactions with Albus Dumbledore, Harry had never heard him say that without qualification or redirection. Afraid of what? Hermione asked softly from behind Harry, and the fact that she couldn't keep quiet meant she was as startled as Harry was. Of what it would do to him. Dumbledore's eyes moved between them. A prophecy is a burden. A royal bloodline, with all its claims and obligations and the enemies it creates, he paused. I wanted to give you a childhood, Harry. Or some approximation of one. You gave me the Dursleys, Harry said. Yes. The word was very quiet. That is the decision I find most difficult to justify. I have told myself many times that the blood wards, the protection they provided, I know about the protection. I also know about the withdrawals from my vault. Harry let that land without softening it. Monthly. For 14 years. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the ones before it. The funds went to the Dursleys, Dumbledore said. To ensure your continued placement with them. A pause. And to ensure their continued compliance. Ron said, and there was nothing gentle in his voice. Dumbledore did not look away from Harry. Cooperation, he said. I am not going to insult you by suggesting it was adequate. It was not. But the alternative, he spread his hands. A child publicly known to be the heir of Pendragon, of 22 noble houses, targeted by Voldemort from birth, would have been harder to manipulate, Harry said. Would have been harder to protect, Dumbledore said, and his voice had more steel in it than Harry expected. Do not mistake my choices for carelessness about your safety. Every choice I made, however wrong, however I regret the manner of it, was made because I was trying to keep you alive. I believe that, Harry said. Dumbledore looked slightly surprised. I believe you thought you were protecting me. I believe it came from genuine care. Harry stood up. But here's what I need you to understand. I'm 16 years old. I have 22 family inheritances. I have a royal claim that supersedes the Ministry of Magic. I have a vault full of ancient artifacts and a dead king's letter and a sword that chose me. He picked up Caledulch from where he'd rested it against the desk. I'm going to use all of it. I'm going to fight this war on my terms, not the terms of a plan I wasn't told about. And I'm going to do it whether you help me or not. He wasn't threatening. He was explaining. I would like your help, Harry continued. I respect you. I know how much you know and I'm not arrogant enough to think I can ignore your experience. But I need to know that you're telling me the truth. All of it. From here on. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Can you do that? The fire crackled. Fawkes made his low sound again. The portraits on the walls, Harry realized, were all very carefully paying attention. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. You are very like your father, he said at last. He too had a way of asking questions that made deceit feel like it cost too much. He sounded, Harry thought, both sad and admiring. I will tell you what I know. All of it. But Harry, he hesitated. There are things in what I know that will be difficult to hear. Everything worth knowing is, Harry said. Dumbledore nodded once. He reached into his desk drawer and produced a small pensieve, travel-sized, something Harry hadn't seen before, and set it on the desktop. Then sit back down, he said. This will take several hours. Harry sat. Hermione's quill was already out. They were in the office for 3 hours and 40 minutes. What Dumbledore showed them was not a confession, it was more like a map of a mind that had spent 60 years in a war, making decisions under pressure with incomplete information, sometimes brilliant, sometimes catastrophically wrong, and always with the terrible sincerity of someone who believed they were the only person capable of making the right call. The prophecy they already knew. What they didn't know was the second interpretation, that the prophecy identified a person who would have power over Voldemort, but not necessarily the only power. That Dumbledore had believed from early on that Harry's survival was connected to something older than the prophecy itself, something in the bloodline, but had been afraid to investigate too deeply because doing so might trigger exactly the kind of attention from Voldemort that he was trying to prevent. The withdrawals. Dumbledore laid them out honestly, the payments to the Dursleys, yes, but also a portion that had gone into a separate fund for Harry's later education, which sat in a Gringotts sub-account that Dumbledore had either forgotten or chosen not to mention. That landed heavily in the room. The Order's discussions, over the years, about whether to tell Harry more. The arguments, Moody arguing for full disclosure, Molly Weasley arguing for protection, Dumbledore himself coming down, again and again, on the side of managed information. Not cruelty. Fear. Constantly, always, fear of what full knowledge might do to a child. What struck Harry, watching it all unfold through pensive memories and quiet explanation, wasn't the anger he'd expected. It was something more complicated, the recognition that Dumbledore was brilliant and flawed and had spent a lifetime doing an impossible job imperfectly, like everyone does impossible jobs. That didn't make the choices right. It made them human. The education fund, Harry said, when they were done. How much? Approximately 15,000 galleons, Dumbledore said. Transfer it back to my main vault. Harry stood. All of it. Of course. And the order? Harry looked at him steadily. I'm not leaving it. But I need a seat at the table. A real one. Not a version where Moody reports to you and you summarize the summary for me. He paused. I'm an asset, Dumbledore. Not a symbol. If you want me in this war, treat me like one. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The last time someone spoke to me like that in this office, he said, it was your grandfather. Good, Harry said. Something crossed the headmaster's face, not quite a smile, but something warmer than his usual expression. He inclined his head, very slightly, in a motion that Harry understood was not a gesture this man made often or lightly. They left the office as the late afternoon turned the castle windows to amber. In the corridor, Ron let out a long breath. That was, a lot, Hermione agreed. He was honest, Harry said. That's what I needed. He started walking, and his friends fell in on either side of him, and the three of them moved through the corridor with that particular ease of people who have been walking side by side for a long time and have learned each other's rhythms. He's still keeping things back. Small things. I could see the gaps. But not actively lying, Hermione said. Not today. We'll see how long that lasts. He looked sideways at her. You got everything? She held up her notebook. 4.5 filled now. Every word. Good. He thought about Neville's letter, about Thursday morning. About 22 seals pulsing in a basin in a bank deep beneath London. About a dead king who'd written finish it and meant it. Start on the Wisengamot structure tonight. Specifically the noble house's provisions, the quorum rules, and anything about emergency sessions called under ancient right. Hermione's eyes lit up in the way that meant she'd already started. And Ron, Harry glanced at him. Your dad. Tonight, Ron said firmly. I'll flew him from the common room. Tell him, Harry considered. Tell him that his son's friend needs advice from someone who understands how the ministry actually works, not how it's supposed to work. Ron grinned. He'll love that. They walked down through the castle, past the great hall, out through the main doors into the evening. The grounds were green and quiet and smelled of coming summer. The lake sat silver in the fading light. A few owls were just beginning their evening flights. Harry stopped on the front steps and looked out at it all, the castle, the grounds, the sky going deep blue in the east, and thought about the letter in his pocket from a king 3 centuries dead, and the sword in his hand that felt like purpose, and his friends at his back who had said obviously in every word and tonight without being asked. He thought about everything Dumbledore had said, and everything he hadn't. He thought about 22 houses, and 1 crown sitting on a table in the dark, waiting. Not yet, he thought. But soon. He walked down the steps, and Hermione matched his pace on his left, and Ron on his right, and the 3 of them moved toward the future with the particular quality of people who have decided to stop waiting for it to arrive. Chapter 3, The crown that was never buried. Thursday morning arrived with actual sunlight, which Harry took as either a good omen or the universe's idea of a joke. Neville was already at the leaky cauldron when Harry got there, sitting at the same back booth with a cup of tea going cold in front of him and the expression of someone who had been awake for a while and had used the time productively for worrying. He looked up when Harry came through the door, and something in his face shifted, not relief exactly, more like the particular settling that happens when you've been uncertain about something and then the thing arrives and turns out to be real. You felt it, Harry said, sliding in across from him. 3 days ago. Like, Neville stopped, looked at his hands. Like something in my chest clicked. I know that sounds stupid. It doesn't. Harry set Caledolch on the table. Neville stared at it. A lot happened this week. I'm going to tell you all of it. Ron and Hermione came in 2 minutes later, Ron carrying 4 breakfasts on a levitated tray with the casual competence of someone raised in a large family. Hermione sat down, opened her notebook, and then deliberately closed it again. She was here as a friend first this morning, and Harry appreciated her making that choice visibly. He told Neville. Same way he'd told Ron and Hermione, straight, complete, no softening. Neville listened without interrupting, which was a relatively new development. The Neville of first year would have interrupted with apologies. The Neville who'd fought in the Department of Mysteries listened with his hands flat on the table and his eyes steady. When Harry finished, Neville was quiet for a moment. The clicking feeling, he said slowly. That was the Longbottom line responding to the Pendragon activation. That's what I think, yes. I need to go to Gringotts. Not a question. A decision. I know. I can come with you, if I should do it myself first. Neville looked up, and there was something in his face that Harry recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror the morning after the Department of Mysteries, the expression of someone who has just decided to stop treating themselves as secondary. I need to know what my family actually is before I stand next to yours. That sentence sat in the air for a moment. Fair, Harry said simply. Hermione passed Neville a summary she'd written the previous night, 2 pages, clear and precise, covering what he should expect from a full inheritance assessment and what his rights were during the process. Neville read it once, folded it into his breast pocket, and drank his cold tea without making a face about it. Gran, he said. She'll be, he stopped again. Reconsidered. Actually, I have no idea what she'll do. She might be furious. She might cry. She might demand we all come to dinner. He looked at Harry. She respects power, Gran. Always has. She's going to look at you differently now. Everyone's going to look at me differently, Harry said. I need to figure out how to manage that. You don't, Neville said, with a quiet certainty that surprised the table. You stop managing it. You just are it and let people figure out how to respond. He picked up the sword from the table, turned it over in his hands briefly, and set it back down. It's not arrogance. It's just, being honest about what you are. The booth was quiet for a moment. Ron pointed at Neville. That was extremely wise. I've been reading, Neville said, slightly defensively. What? Hermione asked. Everything I could find about the old noble families. Their histories. How they thought about power and responsibility. There's this book, The Compact and the Crown, by Alara Greengrass, 1834, it's in the restricted section but Gran had a copy because Gran has copies of everything, and it talks about the difference between authority claimed and authority held. Claimed authority needs constant defending. Held authority just exists. You can feel the difference when you're around someone who has it. Harry thought about Ragnarok, who had not once raised his voice or made a threat and had nonetheless communicated the complete certainty of his position in every sentence he'd spoken. "I want to read that book," Harry said. "I brought it." Neville produced it from his bag, a slim, dark-covered volume with the particular weight of something that had been read many times. "I thought you might." Harry took it. The title on the spine was worn almost to invisibility, and when he opened it the pages had the soft, slightly furry quality of paper that had been turned many times by many hands. Someone, Neville's grandmother, presumably, had made small margin notes in a sharp, decisive hand. Harry caught phrases, "See Pendragon Accord, ch4 and this is what Frank should have been taught" and, on one page near the middle, simply, "True." He closed it carefully and put it in his own bag. "Right," he said. "Neville, go to Gringotts today. Tell them who you are and that you're requesting a full assessment. They'll know what to do." He paused. "And when you come back, whatever it says, you're in this with us. If you want to be." "I want to be," Neville said, without hesitation, and that was that. Luna arrived at 10:30, which was slightly later than Harry had asked but precisely when Luna decided things needed to happen, which was a distinction Harry had learned to respect. She came through the leaky cauldron's main door with her usual dreamlike drift, carrying an enormous canvas bag covered in hand-painted moons, wearing robes of pale yellow, and eating what appeared to be a radish on a string as a necklace that she was also using as an occasional snack. She sat down, looked at Harry, looked at the sword, and said, "The Nargles have been very excited this week. I expect that was you." "Probably," Harry said. "Luna, I need to tell you, you're the Pendragon heir," she said pleasantly. "The goblins at Gringotts have been lighting incense in the director's private corridor for the first time in 3 centuries. Daddy heard about it from his contact at the bank. He says it's very good news." She took a small sip of tea. "He also says congratulations." Hermione blinked. "Your father knew. Daddy knows a lot of things. He just doesn't always know how to write them in a way that people take seriously." Luna's large eyes settled on Harry with that particular quality they always had, not quite looking at him, but looking at something slightly deeper than a normal person would think to look. "You're going to need someone who understands the things that don't fit in categories. That's why you asked me." "Yes," Harry said. "Good." She reached into her enormous bag and produced, with no apparent surprise at finding it, a rolled parchment that looked extremely old. "I brought you something from Daddy's archive. It's a survey of the Pendragon vault made in 1843 by a goblin historian named Gorback. He describes the objects inside and their properties. Particularly the cloak." Harry straightened. He hadn't gotten to the cloak yet, the letter had mentioned it, and he'd brought it with him from the vault, but he hadn't been entirely sure what he was dealing with. He took the parchment from Luna and unrolled it. Gorback's survey was written in dense, careful script. Harry found the cloak entry near the bottom of the first page, the invisibility cloak of the Pendragon line. Distinguished from the common enchanted variety by its origin in the original Deathly Hallows Compact. This is the master cloak, the true Death's cloak, passed to Pendragon through Ignotus Peveril's line. It does not merely conceal the wearer from sight, but from Death's attention entirely. No detection charm, no magic of finding, penetrates it. It is complete. Harry stopped reading. He thought about his own invisibility cloak, which he'd had since first year. The one Dumbledore had given him, saying it had been his father's. He looked at Luna. "Ignotus Peveril," he said slowly. "I'm heir to House Peveril." "Yes," Luna said. "Dumbledore told me first year that the invisibility cloak was my father's. That it was a family heirloom. It was, Hermione said carefully. The Peveril line descended into the Potter line through, she stopped. Her eyes went wide with the expression of someone completing a calculation they hadn't realized they were running. Oh. Oh. Harry. The cloak Dumbledore gave you, is the same cloak Gorbak is describing, Harry finished. The table went quiet. Then Dumbledore had the original Pendragon cloak, Ron said. Your cloak. Your inheritance. And he kept it. He gave it back, Harry said, because this was true and he was trying to be accurate rather than immediately furious. First year. He gave it to me. When you were 11, Hermione said, and had no idea what it was. Harry thought about Dumbledore's office 2 days ago. The gaps in the conversation. The small things kept back. He filed it. He didn't stop to be angry about it. He just filed it and kept moving, because that was how this worked, not ignoring it, just putting it where it could be dealt with at the right time. I have 2 cloaks, then, he said. The one I've been using, and the Pendragon one from the vault. That's actually useful. He looked at Luna. What else does your father's archive have? Luna smiled, and it was one of her real smiles, the ones that were warmer than the dreamy expression people usually got from her. Quite a lot, she said. He'll want to talk to you. If you don't mind. Set it up, Harry said. And Luna, I need your instincts on something else. Something more immediately pressing. He pulled out a piece of parchment and slid it across to her. It was the list of noble houses, the 22 names, with Hermione's political map beside it. Tell me which of these families I should approach first. Not politically, I have Ron's analysis for that. Tell me which ones are ready. Luna looked at the list for about 4 seconds. The Greengrasses, she said. Daphne Greengrass's father is exhausted. He's been Voldemort adjacent for 2 years and he hates every moment of it. He'd come to your side if you gave him a reason that didn't cost him his dignity. She paused, tilting her head. The Abbotts. Hannah's family are old traditionalists but genuinely decent. They're waiting for someone legitimate to stand behind. Another pause. And the Bones family. But you probably knew that already. Amelia Bones, Harry said. She's the only person in the ministry worth saving, according to Daddy. Luna smiled again. His words. Harry looked at the list, then at his friends, Hermione with her notebooks, Ron with his map, Neville's empty seat where he'd be at Gringotts right now, Luna eating her radish necklace and somehow knowing everything that mattered. He felt something he recognized as the particular warmth of being exactly where you were supposed to be. All right, he said. Let's go to the vault. They went back to Gringotts that afternoon. Ragnarok met them himself this time, which Harry was beginning to understand was not a normal occurrence. The director of Gringotts did not typically escort customers to their vaults. He did today, leading them back down through the marble corridor with the old carvings, past the level where the assessment room was, past the cart tunnels, down to the deep still air of the Pendragon level. Ron and Hermione had not been to the vault. Harry watched their faces as the door opened, the plain stone, the handprint, the warm recognition, and saw them both go still in the way people go still when something hits them larger than they expected. This is real, Ron said quietly, not to anyone in particular. It's very real, Ragnarok confirmed, with the satisfaction of someone who deals in tangible things and finds abstract doubt mildly tedious. They spread the vault's contents on the ancient table. Harry went through each item methodically while Hermione cross-referenced Gorbak's survey and her own notes, and Luna drifted around the edges of the vault touching the walls with her fingertips and murmuring things too low to hear. The Pendragon ring went on Harry's right hand without ceremony. It fit perfectly, which should have been impossible given that it had been made over 1,000 years ago for a man who was probably built on a completely different scale, but the ring resized itself the moment it touched his finger and sat there feeling like it had always been there and had just been briefly misplaced. The signet was the Pendragon crest, a dragon in flight over a crown, simple and ancient, the lines worn smooth by centuries of use. Harry pressed it to a piece of blank parchment and watched the seal come up clear and dark, and felt something solidify in him that he didn't have a word for exactly, but that felt related to the word legitimate. The book, the compact, he handled carefully. Hermione reached for it with the contained desperation of someone seeing a primary source document for the first time. Harry handed it to her. "Read all of it," he said. "Especially the boring parts." She looked up at him, then at the book, then back at him, and her expression was one he'd only seen a handful of times, pure, uncomplicated joy. "Thank you," she said, like he'd given her a present. "Don't thank me, thank the dead king." The cloak was last. Harry already had his own invisibility cloak, so he unfolded this one with a kind of professional assessment, and then stopped when it settled over his hands, because this was immediately, entirely different. His own cloak was good. This one was like comparing a candle to a star. The fabric was the same in texture, but the magic in it was dense and old and complete, exactly as Gorback had written. It didn't feel like wearing something that hid you. It felt like becoming genuinely absent from a place you'd been standing. He folded it and put it in his bag alongside the other one. "Right," he said, looking at the table. "The sword, the ring, the cloaks, the book. The crown," he looked at it. Still on the table, still waiting, the dark metal with its single deep-water stone. Still not yet. He could feel that clearly. Not yet. But soon. "How will you know?" Hermione asked. "I'll know," he said, and was somehow certain of it. Ragnarok, standing at the vault door, made a sound. Harry turned. "There is one more thing," the director said. He reached into his robes and produced a small, flat case, polished dark wood, old hinges. "Found during our reassessment of your accounts. It was in a sealed compartment of the Potter main vault, keyed specifically to your blood. It could not have been opened by anyone else, and we did not know its contents until your assessment activated the blood seal." He held it out. "It is from your mother." The vault was very quiet. Harry took the case. He opened it. Inside was a letter, shorter than Selim's, 2 pages, in handwriting he recognized from the Christmas cards he'd found in an old trunk in 3rd year. Neat, warm, with small curling flourishes on the capital letters. And beneath the letter, a small key on a silver chain, and a folded piece of parchment that, when opened, turned out to be a map of wards. Specifically, ward schematics, layers of protective enchantment drawn in his mother's precise hand, annotated with notes in a shorthand he'd need to decode, with a title at the top that read, "The Amplification Compact. Blood-based ward anchor. For Harry. When he's ready." Harry read the letter standing up, because sitting down felt wrong for this. "My darling," it began, and he had to stop for a moment and breathe through the particular pain of a mother's handwriting using those words to reach across 15 years of silence. "If you're reading this, then you survived. I knew you would. That's not hope, I built the protection myself, and I know my own work, and what I built will hold. There are things Dumbledore doesn't know about what I did the night Voldemort came for us. The sacrifice protection is real, he's right about that, but it's not passive. I didn't just die for you. I anchored a ward into your blood, and that ward is keyed to the Pendragon line, because your father told me about the bloodline research, and I understood the implications better than either of them gave me credit for. The ward I built doesn't just protect you. It amplifies your magic, your bloodline's magic, your claim. I built it as a foundation so that when you were old enough, and ready, and the compact activated, and it was going to activate, Harry, I was certain of it even before you were born, you would be the most magically capable version of yourself possible. The key is for a second vault. Not at Gringotts, at the Potter estate in Somerset. There are research materials there that I want you to have. My personal notes on ward theory, blood magic, and the specific properties of sacrificial protection. I think you'll find uses for them. I am so proud of you for surviving. I am so proud of you for whatever you're doing right now. I want you to know that everything I did because I believed in you, not in the prophecy, not in bloodlines or destiny or old compacts. In you. In the boy I knew you were going to be. Fight smart. Trust the people who've earned it. Don't let anyone tell you that power and goodness can't live in the same person, because they can, and you are the proof of it. All my love, always. Mom. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully, put it in the breast pocket of his robes, close, where he could feel it, and stood at the table in the ancient vault with his friends around him and the history of his blood running in a deep current under everything, and was quiet for a moment. Nobody spoke, because they understood that this was his moment and it needed to simply be itself without commentary. Then he looked up, and his eyes were clear. "We need to go to Somerset," he said. They went that evening, by portkey that Ragnarok arranged with the easy efficiency of an institution that had been moving people and things across Britain for 3,000 years. Potter's End arrived around them in the way places do when you arrive by portkey, sudden, total, immediate. It was larger than Harry had imagined. Not ostentatious, nothing like the manor houses of old pure-blood families with their pointed towers and aggressive aesthetics, but solid and warm and present, a building that had been built to last and had succeeded. Stone facade, ivy that had been kept to a dignified rather than overwhelming level, tall windows that caught the late evening light and threw it back gold. The grounds were 40 acres of West Country countryside, hills, trees, a kitchen garden that had been maintained by enchantment and showed it, with rows of things growing in rather better order than any Muggle gardener could have managed. The front door opened when Harry touched it. Inside was the particular feeling of a house that hasn't been lived in but hasn't been abandoned either. The wards had kept it perfectly, the rooms were clean and the furniture was covered in light dust sheets that rustled in the evening air. The entrance hall had dark wood floors and a staircase of the same wood going up in a graceful sweep, with portraits on the wall, Potters, going back generations, watching with expressions ranging from curious to delighted to, in one elderly gentleman's case, deeply suspicious. Harry walked through the ground floor rooms with his friends trailing behind him, and it felt nothing like Grimmauld Place's oppressive darkness. This house felt like it was glad to be visited. Warm somehow, even with the dust sheets, even after 15 years of emptiness. The kitchen still had pots hanging on the wall. The library had 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling books and a fireplace big enough to stand in. One room, a study, light and airy, with a view over the gardens, still had papers on the desk, as if the person who worked here had just stepped out. Harry stood in the doorway of that study for a long moment. His father had worked here. The parchment on the desk, the ink-stained blotter, the pile of books with bookmarks and annotations, all of it preserved by the household wards, unchanged since 1981. He went in and sat at the desk. The chair fit him the way the ring had fit him, not perfectly, because his father had been taller, but close enough. He put his hands on the arms of the chair and looked at the study around him, at the books and the papers and the view of the evening garden through the old glass. Ron appeared in the doorway. "All right?" "Yeah," Harry said. And he was. "Find the second vault, would you? The key Mum mentioned, there should be a room, probably underground. Look for a door that responds to me. On it." Ron disappeared down the corridor. Hermione came to lean against the doorframe. She had the compact in one hand, already open to somewhere near the middle, and was reading while she walked, which was Hermione's natural state. "This house needs people in it," she said, without looking up. "It's going to get them," Harry said. She looked up at that. Something in the certainty of how he said it made her go slightly still. "You're thinking about using it as a base. The Order has Grimmauld Place. Which Dumbledore controls." He looked at her. "I need something that's mine." She looked around the study, then out at the corridor, then at him. "It would need warding. Properly warding, not just the standing household enchantments. My mother's notes are downstairs, apparently." I suspect she thought of that. Hermione's expression was the one where she was trying not to smile too broadly because she thought it was inappropriate to the gravity of the moment. She was mostly failing. Harry. Your mum was a ward specialist. If her personal research notes are in that vault, we're going to learn a lot of things, Harry agreed. She gave up on not smiling. It was a good smile, bright and real and slightly overwhelmed. This is an extraordinary week, she said. It's about to get more extraordinary, Harry said. I'm calling a meeting here. In 4 days. Everyone, Neville, Luna, anyone else we decide to trust. And I'm writing to Amelia Bones. Hermione blinked. The head of the DMLE. Harry, she's the only person in the ministry not either compromised or useless. I have the legal standing to request a private meeting under noble house privilege, that's in the compact, Hermione, Chapter 4. A lord of a noble and most ancient house has the right to request closed session consultation with any ministry official, who is legally required to attend. He paused. 22 houses means I can do that 22 times before anyone notices a pattern. She stared at him. You read the compact. I read the first 50 pages on the portkey. You had it, so I looked over your shoulder. He almost smiled. The boring parts are the important ones. Luna drifted past the study doorway, trailing her fingers along the corridor wall and humming something. The house likes you, she called back, without stopping. Good, Harry called after her. Ron's voice came up from somewhere below, found it. There's a door in the wine cellar and it just opened when I walked toward it because apparently it thinks I'm you. That'll be the secondary blood wards, Hermione said, already moving toward the corridor. They'd key to people associated with the primary heir. Ron, don't touch anything, let Harry. Their voices disappeared down the stairs, and Harry sat for a moment longer in his father's chair in his father's study in a house that had been waiting 15 years for him to come back to it. He thought about what came next. Amelia Bones. The noble house meetings. The Wisengamot session he was already beginning to plan, in the broad strokes, the way you plan something you know is coming and want to arrive for correctly. The conversation with Draco Malfoy that he'd been thinking about since the vault, an idea still forming, edges not quite sharp yet, but present. He thought about Voldemort. About what Hermione had said, that a legitimate king made the whole ideological framework incoherent. About the moment Voldemort's spies reported back what had happened in Gringotts, which had probably already happened. About what Voldemort would do with that information. He would shift tactics. He was intelligent enough for that. The question was how, and in what direction. Harry stood up from the desk, picked up Caledulch from where he'd leaned it against the bookshelf, and went downstairs to find his friends and his mother's research and the next piece of what was coming. The vault beneath the house was smaller than the Gringotts vault and more personal, a single room, stone walls, shelves floor to ceiling on 3 sides, and in the center a writing table with a candle that lit automatically when Harry entered. The shelves held notebooks, dozens of them, his mother's handwriting on the spines in fading ink, research materials, and sealed cases he'd need to open one by one. Hermione was already reading a notebook, standing up because she couldn't wait to sit down first. Ron was examining the cases with the methodical care he used for things he knew were beyond him but wanted to understand. Luna was sitting cross-legged on the floor, apparently communing with the room itself. She was extraordinary, Hermione said, without looking up. Harry, do you understand what she was doing? The ward she built, the sacrifice protection, it's not a single charm. It's a system. She spent 2 years developing it before, she stopped. Started again. She knew. She had time. She built this deliberately. She was ready, Harry said. She was ready, Hermione confirmed softly. And she built the amplification ward so that when your Pendragon line activated, it would be, she turned pages quickly. She called it a resonance effect. The Pendragon magic and the blood sacrifice protection would interact at activation and multiply. The sum is larger than the parts. She looked up at him. Harry. Your magic right now is not the same as it was 2 weeks ago. I know, he said. How does it feel? He thought about the sword aligning in his hand, about the gates of Hogwarts opening with recognition rather than permission, about sitting in his father's chair and feeling the house settle around him like something relieved. "Like I have more room," he said. She nodded slowly, turning back to the notebook. Ron found a case of old correspondence and held up a letter. "Your dad and Sirius wrote letters," he said, reading. "Loads of them. This one's from 1979. They were planning something." "Put it aside," Harry said. "We'll read them later." "Not tonight." He looked around the vault. "Tonight I want the ward notes. All of them. We're securing this house before we leave." They worked until past midnight, reading and sorting and making notes, until the vault's candle burned low and Ron fell asleep sitting up with a letter from 1979 in his hand, and Luna announced that the house was satisfied and they could stop for the night, and Hermione finally set down her notebook with the careful reverence of someone putting down something precious. Harry sealed the vault and walked back upstairs through his family's house, the one that had been waiting, and stood at the front door looking out at the Somerset night. Clear sky, stars in significant numbers, the kind of sky you never saw in Little Privet Drive because the streetlights ate it. He heard footsteps behind him. "Hermione. The meeting in 4 days," she said. "Who else beyond Neville and Luna?" "Ginny," Harry said. She blinked. "She's smart, she's capable, and she's been treated as peripheral for too long. She's in if she wants to be." He paused. "And I want to send a letter to Daphne Greengrass. A Slytherin. Luna said her father is ready to come over. If Daphne is anything like her father." Hermione considered. "It's a risk." "Everything's a risk," Harry said. "The question is whether the potential is worth it." He looked at the stars. "Voldemort found out today or yesterday. About Gringotts. About me." He felt Hermione go still beside him. "He's going to move. I don't know how yet, but he's thinking about it right now, somewhere, and whatever he decides is going to be interesting." "Interesting," she repeated, with considerable feeling. "He doesn't know what to do with a king," Harry said. "He knows prophecies. He knows symbols. He knows weapons. He doesn't know how to fight an institution." He turned from the doorway. "So we're going to be an institution before he figures it out." Hermione looked at him in the starlight with the expression she'd had in the vault when he'd handed her the compact, that slightly overwhelmed brightness. "You've changed," she said. "No," he said. "I've just caught up to myself." She thought about that for a moment. Then, quietly, "I'm with you. All of it." "I know," he said. "You always were." They went back inside, and Harry locked the front door with his blood, the ward accepting it, the house sighing into a deeper security, and went up the stairs of his family home to the room that had been prepared by enchantment for an heir who'd taken 15 years to arrive, and slept better than he had in as long as he could remember. 240 miles north, in a manor house with no warmth and very deliberate darkness, a man with no nose and red eyes read a report that had been delivered by an exhausted owl and sat very still for a long time. The report was short. It contained 3 pieces of information. The Pendragon bloodline had activated. An heir had claimed it. The heir's name was Harry Potter. Voldemort set the report down on the desk with the careful precision of someone controlling an impulse he found beneath him, and looked at the far wall, and thought. He thought for a very long time. When Bellatrix came to the door, half an hour later, and asked if he required anything, he said, "Tell Lucius the First want to speak with him." And Bellatrix, he didn't turn from the wall. The old noble families. The ones who are with us for expediency rather than belief. How many of them, do you think, still believe in the concept of a king? Bellatrix made a dismissive noise. Old sentiment. No one. How many, he said again, very softly. She stopped. Most of them, she said, more carefully this time. My lord. Yes, Voldemort said. I suspected as much. He continued looking at the wall, and whatever he was planning in the vast cold architecture of his mind remained his alone, and when Lucius arrived 20 minutes later and read the same report, Lucius Malfoy went very still in a way that had nothing to do with fear of his master and everything to do with a 15-year-old political calculation suddenly and catastrophically coming apart. "The boy is 16, Lucius said, recovering. "Yes," Voldemort agreed. "And currently more legitimately powerful than either of us, in the eyes of the oldest law this country has." He turned from the wall. His eyes were not angry. They were something more careful than that. "So we will need to be intelligent, Lucius. Not brutal. Intelligent." A pause. "And fast." Chapter 4, of the Pendragon Compact of 499 AD, as formally recognized under the Goblin Banking Accord of 1752. I hold primary claim to 22 noble and most ancient houses, including the Pendragon claim, as certified by Gringotts Bank on the 12th of July. I believe we have interests in common. I would prefer to discuss them before they become public record. I will be at Potter's End, Somerset, on Saturday morning at 10. You are legally required to attend, though I would prefer it to be because you want to. Harry Potter, Lord of House Pendragon et al. He addressed it with the Pendragon seal, which he'd already discovered produced a very specific effect on parchment. The wax took the impression perfectly and glowed very briefly dark blue before settling to black, and anyone who touched the sealed letter would feel a slight pressure of recognition, the magical equivalent of a formal title being spoken aloud. Hermione read the final letter over his shoulder. "The last line," she said. "Too much." She considered. "No. It's honest. She'll appreciate honest more than formal." She paused. "The legally required to attend part might remind her that I know my rights?" "Yes. That's intentional." The letter went out with Hedwig on Thursday evening. By Friday morning, Hedwig was back with a reply written on ministry letterhead in the compact, decisive hand of someone who writes a great deal and wastes nothing. "Mr. Potter. Saturday at 10. I'll come alone. Don't waste my time. A. Bones, Director, DMLE." "She's going to be interesting," Ron said, reading it. "Good," Harry said. Neville came back from Gringotts on Friday afternoon with the particular quality of someone who has just had their entire internal landscape redrawn and is still recalibrating their sense of direction. He arrived at Potter's End by Flo. Harry had connected the house to the network that morning, keyed specifically to the people he'd invited, and stood in the sitting room with ash on his robes and an expression that was somewhere between shell-shocked and quietly, fiercely alive. "Well," he said. "Well," Harry said. "So." Neville sat down heavily in one of the chairs that had been uncovered and cleaned. The house had a way of arranging itself hospitably, Harry had noticed, the fire lit when people entered, the right chairs were somehow always available, things felt arranged rather than accidental. House Longbottom is one of the oldest lines in Britain. I knew that in a general way. I didn't know, he stopped, then started again. My account manager is a goblin named Flint Edge, and she looked at me for about 40 seconds before she said anything, and when she did she said, and I'm quoting directly, "You have been extraordinarily underestimating yourself, Lord Longbottom." "Lord Longbottom," Ron said, from the sofa, with genuine warmth. "I'm heir to 11 properties," Neville said. 11. Gran told me about Longbottom Hall. She didn't mention the other 10. He shook his head. There are 3 Wisengamot seats attached to the Longbottom line. 3. He looked at Harry. And there's a dormant magical inheritance. The Longbottom line has a compact with yours, House Potter, from 1643. In the event that the Pendragon claim activates, the Longbottom line receives a sympathetic amplification. Flint Edge said it's already started. I felt it happen, Harry said. The moment the assessment activated. Neville looked at his hands. My magic is different. It's been building for 3 days and I thought I was imagining it. He summoned a book from across the room without his wand, wandlessly, effortlessly, with the casual ease of someone discovering they've been lifting with one arm tied behind their back their entire life. He stared at the book in his hand. "Oh," he said softly. "Yeah," Harry said. "Oh," Neville said again, and this time there was something in it that was closer to joy than shock. Luna, who had been sitting in the window seat reading one of her father's research pamphlets, looked up and said, "The Nargles are very pleased with you, Neville." She returned to her pamphlet. This was apparently sufficient comment on the situation. Harry watched Neville sit with his new self for a moment, the magic, the title, the 11 properties, the 3 Wisengamot seats, the weight of a line that had been half asleep for too long. He watched Neville square his shoulders, the way he had in the Department of Mysteries just before the 6 of them had run into an ambush and Neville had kept fighting with a broken nose. "Right," Neville said, and his voice was level. "What do you need me to do?" The meeting on Saturday morning had 8 people in it by the time 10 o'clock arrived. Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, and Luna were the core. Ginny had arrived Friday evening, fled from the burrow with a bag over her shoulder and no particular explanation offered, which was the Weasley family approach to decisions already made. She'd walked into the sitting room, looked at Harry, looked at the sword on the table, and said, "About time something happened." Then she'd gone to find a room, and that was that. The 7th was Arthur Weasley, who had come quietly and alone on Saturday morning with the carefully non-alarmed expression of a ministry employee who had spent 20 years learning not to look alarmed in professional settings. He'd shaken Harry's hand with both of his, looked at him for a long moment, and said, "Your father would have handled this exactly this way," which was perhaps the most useful thing he said all morning, and he said many useful things. The 8th was Daphne Greengrass, which was the arrival that made the room tightest. She came precisely on time, alone, in robes that were immaculate and an expression that was carefully arranged to give very little away. She was tall, fair-haired, with the particular self-possession of someone raised to understand that every room they enter is being watched. She stood in the doorway of the sitting room and looked at Harry, and Harry looked at her, and there was a moment of mutual assessment that was entirely honest on both sides. "You wrote to me," she said. "I did," Harry said. "Come in." She came in. She sat, accepting tea from Ron with a slightly surprised expression at being offered it. She looked around the room, at Neville, who she'd shared a herbology bench with for 5 years and now appeared to be slightly different in ways she was cataloguing, at Luna, who waved at her cheerfully, at Ginny and Hermione, who regarded her with the combined wariness of people trying to be fair about someone they had no particular reason to trust yet. "My father," she said to Harry, cutting straight to it. "Luna tells me he's looking for a way out that doesn't cost him everything he's spent his life building," Harry said. "I think I can offer him that. But I wanted to talk to you first." "Why?" "Because he'll do what you advise. You're sharper than him and he knows it." He said it without flattery or condescension, just as an accurate observation. "And because if you're not genuinely in this, having your father nominally on my side is more dangerous than not having him at all." Daphne looked at him steadily. "You're 16, she said. "You keep saying that like it's a counter-argument." Something moved briefly across her face. "Most people your age who get power use it to feel important." "I'm using it to win a war," Harry said. "Those are different things." He picked up the summary Hermione had prepared, 4 pages, clear and complete, laying out the Pendragon claim, the noble house inheritances, the legal standing, and in broad strokes the political strategy. He slid it across the table to her. "Read that. Then tell me what your father needs to hear to come over." She read it. The room had other conversations happening. Arthur was talking quietly to Hermione about Wisengamot procedures, Neville and Ginny were looking at the map of properties, Luna was still reading, but Harry watched Daphne Greengrass turn the 4 pages with the focused attention of someone for whom reading is a form of tactical assessment. She reached the last page. Set it down. Looked at Harry. "He needs immunity," she said. "Not just safety. Formal, legal, binding immunity from prosecution for anything that occurred in the past 5 years. He never took the mark, he was careful about that, but there were payments. Information. Things he looked the other way on. She held Harry's gaze. He's not a good man. I want to be clear about that. He made choices that he knew were wrong and he made them anyway because he was afraid. But he's my father and I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter. It matters, Harry said. And I can offer documented clemency under Noble House Compact, which has more legal weight than a ministry pardon. It can't be overturned by a future administration. He paused. In exchange, I need full disclosure of everything he knows about Voldemort's current ministry infiltration. Daphne considered this with an expression of someone doing complicated sums. He knows about 7 confirmed Death Eater plants inside the ministry as of 6 weeks ago. At least 2 are in the DMLE. Arthur Weasley's conversation with Hermione stopped. How high? Harry asked. One is a department head, Daphne said. Her voice was steady. I don't know which one. My father does. The sitting room was very quiet. Will he meet with me? Harry asked. If I tell him to. A pause. Will you? Yes. With conditions. He comes here, he comes alone, and whatever he tells me, I verify independently before acting on it. Harry held her gaze. I'm not naive. I know this could be a trap. I'm offering it anyway because the alternative, leaving your father where he is, frightened and complicit and increasingly useless to everyone including himself, helps no one. Daphne looked at him for a long moment. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? The stories. The boy who lived. She glanced at the sword on the table. Something angrier. I'm angry, Harry said. I'm just not confused about it. He extended his hand across the table. Are you in? She looked at his hand. The Pendragon ring was visible on his right hand, the signet dark and precise. She looked at it, then at his face, then she shook his hand with the firm, no-nonsense grip of someone who did not make agreements casually and understood exactly what they were agreeing to. I'm in, she said. Ginny, from across the room, met Harry's eyes and gave him the smallest of nods. He'd been right about Daphne. Good. Amelia Bones arrived at exactly 10 o'clock. Harry had expected the director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to look like the institution she ran, formal, structured, edges crisp. What he got was a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with a monocle, iron-gray hair, and the expression of someone who had spent 30 years watching the ministry fail the people it served and had never fully made peace with that. She shook Harry's hand, looked at him the way Ragnarok had looked at him, taking stock, and said, the Pendragon claim is real. I had our legal archives check it yesterday. I assumed you would, Harry said. Come in. Most of the others had moved to the dining room to give them privacy. Hermione stayed, which Amelia Bones acknowledged with a nod that suggested she'd expected it. Arthur stayed too, which made Bones's expression briefly complicated. She and Arthur knew each other, clearly, and the question of where his loyalty sat in a room that was, technically, outside the ministry's awareness was answered simply by the fact that he was sitting at Harry's table. She sat down. Took the tea Hermione offered. Did not make small talk. You know about the ministry infiltration, Harry said. I know some of it. She looked at him steadily. More than I can prove. Less than I need to act. I have a source who knows about 7 confirmed plants, including 1 department head. He held up a hand before she could react. I'm not ready to share the source yet. I will be, once I've verified the information. What I need from you today is something different. Which is? An honest answer to a question. He leaned forward slightly. If I called an emergency session of the Wisengamot next week using Noble House privilege, and I came in with documented legal standing for 16 of the 28 Noble House seats, would Fudge survive it? Amelia Bones looked at him for a long moment. Behind her monocle her eye was very sharp and very considering. Fudge has been compromised, she said, and she said it like someone releasing a held breath, like someone who had been waiting a long time to say the plain truth to someone who could do something with it. Not by the Dark Lord directly, Fudge is a coward, not a true believer. But he's been managed by people who are, and he's made choices in the past year that have put lives at risk because he was more afraid of looking wrong than of being wrong. She set down her teacup. If you walked into the Wisengamot with documented standing for 16 seats, you wouldn't need to do anything dramatic. The maths would speak for themselves. But? Harry said, because there was clearly a but. But he has allies. Umbridge, specifically. The name landed in the room with the particular weight of someone everyone at the table had personal experience with. Arthur's expression tightened. Hermione went very still. She's not just a ministry official, Potter. She's been placed. Her loyalty is not to Fudge, it's to whoever has the most power at any given moment. And she's been working for the past year to build a network of informants inside the school, inside several ministry departments, and inside 3 of the noble house families. Bones paused. She'll know about you already. I expect so, Harry said. She's going to be a problem. She's going to be a significant problem, Bones agreed. She has no legal scruples whatsoever and a genuine belief that order supersedes justice. She will use every procedural mechanism available to challenge your claim before you can use it. Then I need to move faster than she can respond, Harry said. How long does it take to call an emergency Wisengamot session under noble house privilege? Under the current rules, 48 hours notice minimum. And under the Pendragon Compact? Bones looked at him. Then she looked at Hermione. You've read it, she said. All of it, Hermione said. Including Chapter 7, which governs emergency sovereign summons. Under the compact, the Pendragon Heir can call an immediate session, no minimum notice period, in cases of active threat to the magical community. Voldemort is back, Harry said. That seems to qualify. Amelia Bones sat with this for a moment. Harry watched her weigh it, the legal standing, the political risk, the years of watching good people do nothing while the system rotted from the inside. If you do this, she said carefully, there is no going back. The moment you invoke the compact openly in the Wisengamot chamber, you are publicly declaring the Pendragon claim. Every Death Eater with political connections, every family that benefits from the current system, every person who has built their power on the assumption that the ministry is the highest authority in magical Britain, all of them become your active opponents. They already are, Harry said. I'd just rather fight them in a chamber than a graveyard. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her robes and produced a small, official-looking document, ministry letterhead, formally sealed. I took the liberty, she said, of preparing a preliminary motion. Given that I had already verified your claim in our archives. She set it on the table. It's a motion for emergency session, citing active Dark Lord threat and the invocation of noble house privilege. It needs your signature and seal. And it needs 5 co-signatories from noble house families. Harry looked at the document. Then he looked at her. You came ready, he said. I've been ready for a year, she said flatly. I've been waiting for someone with the standing to do something with it. Harry picked up his quill. Signed. Pressed the Pendragon seal. He passed it to Arthur Weasley, who signed as senior member of House Weasley, ancient and noble. Then Hermione sent a quick Patronus, a sleek otter that shot through the wall, and 3 minutes later Neville came in from the dining room and signed for House Longbottom without being asked what it was for, which Harry appreciated. That was 4. He needed 1 more. He looked at Daphne Greengrass, who had followed Neville in from the dining room and was reading the document over Arthur's shoulder. House Greengrass is ancient and noble, she said. It was not a question. It is, Amelia confirmed. Daphne looked at Harry. Harry looked at her. She picked up the quill and signed, in the neat, precise hand of someone who understood exactly what they were doing and had decided to do it anyway. 5, Harry said. Amelia Bones picked up the document, rolled it, and sealed it with her own ministry seal alongside the others. "I'll file this afternoon," she said. "Through channels that Umbridge doesn't monitor. It'll be official by tonight." She stood. "The session will be set for Monday." "Monday," Harry said. "That's 2 days. Is that a problem?" "No," he said. 2 days is fine. I just need to have a conversation before then." The conversation he needed to have was with Draco Malfoy. He wrote the letter Sunday morning, at his father's desk, while the house made its contented sounds around him. This one took only one draft. "Malfoy. I know you know about Gringotts. I know your father told you, and I know you've been thinking about what it means. I'd like to talk to you before Monday, when things become significantly more public. Not a trap. Not a negotiation. Just a conversation between two people who are going to have to figure out what they are to each other in a world that's changing faster than either of us expected. If you want to come, be at the south gate of Potter's End, Somerset, at 2 this afternoon. Come alone. H.P." He sealed it with the Pendragon seal, which he suspected would do interesting things to Draco's composure, and sent it. At 1:55, Harry walked down the drive to the south gate and waited. At 2 o'clock exactly, Draco Malfoy brought to the lane outside the gate with the sharp crack of someone who had recently acquired his license and was still slightly self-conscious about it. He wore plain robes, no Slytherin green, no Malfoy grey, and his expression was doing the thing it always did when Draco was uncertain, which was to arrange itself into careful neutrality so complete it practically announced itself. He looked at Harry through the gate. Harry opened it. Draco walked through with the particular stiffness of someone who has decided to do something and is committed to not showing how much it costs to decide. He looked at the house at the end of the drive, then at Harry, then at the Pendragon ring on Harry's right hand. "That's real," he said. "Everything's real," Harry said. They walked up the drive together, which was surreal enough that Harry filed it away to think about later. Draco looked at the grounds with an expression that was trying to be aristocratic assessment and kept slipping into something more genuine, a kind of recognition, the way you look at something that matches a standard you were raised to respect. "Somerset stone," Draco said. 14-something. 1432, Harry said. Draco nodded slightly. "My father's manor is 1521. He always considered it relatively new. He said it without particular bitterness, just as information. Then, he knows I'm here. I assumed. He doesn't know what I'm going to say." "Neither do I," Harry said. They reached the front steps. Harry sat on them rather than going inside, a choice he'd made deliberately, neutral ground, no power dynamics of host and guest, just two people on steps in the afternoon sun. Draco stood for a moment, then sat beside him with the careful arrangement of someone who has always been taught that how you sit says something about who you are. "Your father's in trouble," Harry said. Not accusatory. Just the shape of the situation. "My father is always in trouble of one kind or another," Draco said, with a precision that sounded almost like bitterness and probably was. "This kind is different. Voldemort's going to need to respond to what happened at Gringotts, and the easiest way for him to demonstrate that he's not threatened is to demonstrate power. The old families that have been with him out of convenience rather than conviction, are convenient targets," Draco said quietly. "For a demonstration." He looked at his hands. "Yes. I know. Your father has information. I need it. In exchange, I can offer documented clemency under the Pendragon Compact. It supersedes ministry law, it can't be revoked by a future administration, and it's binding on every institution in magical Britain." Harry looked at him directly. "I'm not doing this to humiliate him or your family. I'm doing it because I need what he knows and because the alternative is him being caught between two forces and destroyed by the one that doesn't care about him." Draco was quiet for a long moment. Below the steps, a blackbird was doing something complicated in the hedgerow. The West Country afternoon was warm and quiet and seemed entirely indifferent to the weight of what they were discussing. He'll never accept it from you directly, Draco said. His pride, I know. That's why I'm talking to you. Harry looked at him. You're the one who can convince him. Draco turned to look at him, and for a moment the careful neutrality dropped completely, and what Harry saw was a 17-year-old who was exhausted and frightened and furiously intelligent and furious about being frightened, which was a combination Harry recognized because he'd worn it himself. Why do you trust me at all? Draco asked. Not sarcastically. Genuinely. Harry thought about it honestly. I don't, entirely. But I don't need to. I need you to be smart enough to recognize that your best option and your family's best option is the same as my offer. He paused. And I think you are. Draco looked at him for another moment. Then he looked away, back at the grounds, and something in his posture changed. The stiffness didn't leave, but it shifted, changed quality, became less defensive and more thoughtful. There's something else, Draco said. Harry waited. The Dark Lord knows about the session tomorrow. He has someone in the Wizengamot, not a Death Eater, someone who reports to them. I don't know who. He said it quickly, like getting past something unpleasant. I overheard my father last night. They're planning something for Monday. I don't know what. Something to discredit you before you can make your case. Discredit how? Harry asked. Legally. Challenge the claim itself. My father was talking about a counter-petition, some law about underage claimants requiring a magical guardian's counter-signature. He glanced at Harry. It's probably nonsense, but in the Wizengamot, procedure can be weaponized. Who'd be the guardian? Harry asked. Dumbledore, presumably. A pause. Or Fudge. Harry thought about this. Then he thought about Chapter 7 of the Pendragon Compact. Then he almost smiled, which he could tell unsettled Draco slightly. That's not going to work, Harry said. The procedure doesn't apply to Pendragon claimants. The compact specifically exempts sovereign claims from any guardianship requirement. The argument will fail the moment someone checks the original text. He looked at Draco. But I need to know it's coming so I can have the response ready. So, thank you. Draco blinked. Whatever he'd expected from this conversation, genuine thanks was apparently not it. He recovered quickly. You had to give him that. Don't thank me, he said. I have conditions. I'd be more worried if you didn't. What are they? My mother, Draco said, and his voice had a different quality now, stripped down, with the particular rawness of someone naming the thing they actually care about. Whatever happens to my father, whatever he decides, my mother is not collateral. She has never taken the mark, she has never acted against anyone on the Dark Lord's orders, and she has spent the past 2 years living in what is essentially an occupied house. His eyes were steady on Harry's. She gets full protection. Not contingent on anything. Not conditional. Done, Harry said immediately. Draco stared at him. Just like that? You're describing a woman who has done nothing wrong and is in danger. Yes, just like that. Harry held his gaze. I meant what I said in the letter. I'm not here to win by destroying people who don't need to be destroyed. Your mother is safe. That's not a bargaining chip, it's just what's right. The blackbird in the hedgerow went quiet. The afternoon sat around them, warm and still. I'll talk to my father tonight, Draco said. I'll have the clemency documents ready by morning, Harry said. Ragnar can witness them. Draco stood, straightened his robes, and for a moment he looked, Harry thought, slightly less like a Malfoy and slightly more like someone who was becoming something else, not a different person, just a more honest version of the person he'd always been underneath the performance. Potter, he said. Malfoy. For what it's worth. He paused, with visible effort. I've been wrong about you. For years. I was, another pause. Wrong. I know, Harry said. We were both idiots. It's fine. Something flickered across Draco's face. You could have been more gracious about accepting that. Could have, Harry agreed pleasantly. Draco almost, smiled. Then he walked back down the drive, through the gate, and operated away with a crack that sounded somehow less self-conscious than the one coming in. Monday morning arrived with the quality of mornings that know they matter. Harry stood in the entrance hall of Potter's End at 8:30 in robes he'd never worn before, formal, dark, precisely cut, found in a trunk in the master bedroom that turned out to be his father's dress robes, enchanted to resize, which they had done with what felt like filial enthusiasm. The Pendragon ring was on his right hand. Caledulch was at his hip, which was both symbolic and legal. Noble house law permitted lords to carry arms in the Wisingamot chamber, a right that had gone unused for so long most people had forgotten it existed. The crown was still on the table in the vault. Not yet. Hermione stood beside him in formal robes of deep blue, with her notebooks in a bag over her shoulder. Ron was in Weasley dress robes that were, mercifully, not maroon. Neville wore long-bottom formal wear that had clearly been in a trunk somewhere and had been pressed into very recent service, dark green, house colors, with a crest at the collar. He looked, Harry thought, entirely like what he was. Arthur had gone ahead to the ministry the night before, a quiet word to the right people, laying groundwork, because Arthur understood the ministry's social architecture the way a long-term resident understands a city's back streets. Amelia Bones had confirmed the session was filed. It would be announced at 9, session beginning at 11. Harry looked at his assembled people, his inner circle, his friends, the people who had said obviously and I'm in and every word without being asked, who were standing in his family's house on a Monday morning ready to walk into the oldest political chamber in magical Britain, and felt the alignment feeling again, the one that had started with the sword, spreading now to encompass all of it. Right, he said. Let's go make some history. The ministry atrium had a particular quality at 10:30 on a Monday when word had gotten out that something was happening. Not a crowd, ministry corridors didn't do crowds, they did clusters, pockets of people standing slightly too close together and speaking in the careful undertones of people who wanted to look like they were just coincidentally in the same place. Harry walked through the atrium and felt the attention hit him in waves. Some of it was the usual boy who lived thing, which he was accustomed to and had learned to move through without changing his pace. Some of it was different, the Pendragon ring caught the light and the people who knew what it meant, which was more people than he'd expected, went through a visible reckoning. He didn't stop. He didn't perform for it. He just walked. Hermione was on his left, Neville on his right, and there was something in the quality of how they moved, unhurried, purposeful, the three of them together, that caused the atrium clusters to make room without being asked to. The Wisingamot chamber was on level 10, and when the lift arrived and Harry stepped out, the corridor was already busier than it should have been for a session that had been called only yesterday. Word had moved faster than official channels, which meant either the network Harry was building was working, or Voldemort's ministry connections had been working harder. Probably both. Umbridge was in the corridor. Harry had expected her. He had, in fact, planned for her specifically, which was the advantage of having been warned. She was standing outside the chamber doors in ministry robes of deep pink. Harry suspected she owned no other color, with 3 junior ministry officials arranged around her in the particular formation of people who want to look like they aren't accompanying someone but clearly are. She saw Harry coming and her face went through a complicated series of expressions that settled, with visible effort, on a treacly smile. Mr. Potter, she said, in the sweet, poisonous voice he remembered from a year of detentions. How lovely. Though I'm afraid there may be some procedural questions about your eligibility to address the Wisingamot as a minor without, Chapter 7, Article 3 of the Pendragon Compact of 499 AD explicitly exempts sovereign claimants from any age-based procedural restriction, Harry said pleasantly. Your objection is noted and legally invalid. Hermione, who had been prepared for exactly this, produced a copy of the relevant article, the original text, certified by Gringotts and countersigned by Ragnarok himself, and held it out. Umbridge did not take it. Her smile stayed in place, but something behind her eyes went colder. The compact has not been formally recognized by the ministry in current. The compact predates the ministry by 900 years, Harry said, still pleasant. The ministry doesn't get to decide whether it recognizes it. That's not how precedence works. He looked at her directly, and what he felt was not anger but something more useful, clear, steady attention. Is there anything else, or can we go in? One of the junior officials had quietly taken Hermione's document and was reading it with an expression of someone rapidly updating their assessment of the morning's political landscape. Umbridge opened her mouth. "There's nothing else," said a voice from behind Harry, and Amelia Bones walked up the corridor with the unhurried certainty of someone whose authority in this building was considerably more substantial than Umbridge's and had no need to announce itself. She stopped beside Harry, looked at Umbridge, and said, "The session was properly filed, properly sealed, and is proceeding. If you have procedural objections, file them in writing. Chamber opens in 4 minutes. She looked at Harry. "Shall we?" They went in. The Wizengamot chamber was circular and high-ceilinged, with tiered seating in deep mahogany that rose on 3 sides, the chair of the chief warlock on the 4th side facing the center floor where the speaking position stood. It felt very old and slightly cold, with the particular atmosphere of rooms that have held a great deal of consequence and know it. It was also, Harry noted, significantly fuller than a standard session would be. Word had moved very fast. He stood at the speaking position and waited for the session to formally open. Dumbledore arrived and took the chief warlock's chair, and there was a moment between them. The old man looked at Harry from across the chamber with an expression of someone watching a plan unfold that they had only partially authored, and Harry nodded to him, once, and Dumbledore nodded back, and that was the entirety of what needed to be said. Fudge sat in his minister's seat to the left of the chief warlock's chair and looked like a man who had been told he was having a normal Monday and had arrived to find something considerably less normal. Harry waited for the formal opening, for the reading of the session notice, for the procedural settling that chambers like this required before they could do anything. He stood still through all of it, at ease in a way that had nothing to do with not caring and everything to do with having prepared until he was beyond nerves. When the floor was given to him, he didn't begin with the claim. He began with Voldemort. He laid it out simply and clearly, not dramatically, not emotionally, the fact of Voldemort's return, the Department of Mysteries battle, the evidence, the timeline. Things the Wizengamot had technically accepted since Dumbledore's confrontation with Fudge, but which had not been formally addressed as a matter of chamber record. He put it on the record, cleanly, without accusation. Then he put Fudge's response on the record. Not as an attack, as a sequence of documented decisions, with dates, that had demonstrably made the population of magical Britain less safe while the minister prioritized political self-preservation. He cited specific memos, specific meetings, specific suppressed reports from the DMLE, all of which Amelia Bones had quietly made available through Arthur Weasley's network in the past 48 hours. The chamber had gone completely quiet. Fudge was on his feet twice. Harry acknowledged him both times, said, "I'll come to questions at the end," and kept going, which was his right as a noble house lord addressing the chamber under emergency session, and which he knew the compact guaranteed him. Fudge sat back down both times with the expression of someone who had lost an argument they didn't fully understand yet. Then Harry made the claim. He stated it plainly, without theatrics. The Pendragon bloodline, the Gringotts assessment, the compact's conditions and how they'd been met, the certification from Director Ragnarok. He produced the sealed Gringotts documents, which were passed to the clerk, who read them with shaking hands that Harry thought had more to do with the weight of what he was reading than any physical ailment. "The Pendragon Compact," Harry said, "does not grant me power over this chamber. I want to be clear about that, because I suspect some people in this room have been told otherwise. What it grants is standing. Legal, historical, binding standing that predates this institution by 900 years. What I'm using that standing for, today, in this chamber, is simple." He looked around the chamber, at the faces, at the range of expressions from calculation to shock to, in a few cases, something that looked startlingly like relief. "I'm using it to say that the war is real, that the minister's response has been inadequate, and that this chamber needs to stop pretending otherwise. He paused. I'm also formally invoking 16 noble house seats. If anyone wants to contest the documentation, I have copies for all 16. Nobody contested the documentation. Fudge tried to speak. The chief warlock's procedural control of the floor held him off, and Dumbledore held it with the careful precision of someone who understood exactly what was happening and had decided, this morning, which side of it to stand on. The votes happened in stages. The formal recognition of Voldemort's return as a matter of Wizengamot record. The motion of no confidence in the minister's handling of the crisis. The vote on a formal independent inquiry into ministry security following Amelia Bones' motion, which passed with the particular completeness of a vote that was never really in doubt once the numbers were clear. Fudge was not removed from office that morning. That was a separate process, and Harry had always known it. You didn't dismantle a political machine in a single session, you began the process of dismantling it. What happened in the chamber that Monday morning was more important than a single vote. The terms of the conversation changed. Permanently, publicly, with 17 witnesses who would carry the record forward. When it was over and the chamber was filing out in the particular excited rush of people who have been present at a hinge point and need to talk about it, Harry stood at the speaking position for a moment before he moved. He looked at the chamber, at the empty seats, at the clerk still shaking slightly as he organized his documents, at the mahogany and the high ceiling and the cold stone walls that had held this conversation for centuries and would hold what had just happened now for centuries more. Neville appeared beside him. How do you feel? Like we just started something, Harry said. We did, Neville said simply. Hermione came up on his other side, notebooks clutched to her chest, eyes bright. Fudge's office issued a statement before the session even ended, she said. I just got it via Patronus from Arthur. He's calling the claim politically motivated and legally unprecedented. It's historically documented and legally airtight, Harry said. But send his statement to Ragnarok. Let the goblins respond officially. She was already writing. Ron found them at the chamber doors. Malfoy, he said quietly, close. Senior. He's in the corridor. He looks, Ron searched for the word. Like someone who's made a decision and hasn't quite caught up to the relief of it yet. Harry looked out through the chamber doors at the corridor beyond. Lucius Malfoy stood with Draco, both of them still and slightly apart from the general filing out flow. Lucius looked like a man whose world had been reorganized around a fact he hadn't accounted for, not broken, because Lucius Malfoy was too controlled for that, but recalibrated, working on new parameters. He met Harry's eyes. He inclined his head. It was not quite a bow. It was the specific, contained acknowledgement of a man who has decided to recognize something, given the weight of the evidence and the structure of his own survival, and who is doing it with as much dignity as he can manage. Harry held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded back, equally contained, equally clear. They would have the formal meeting. The documents. The information about the ministry plans. All of that was coming. But this, in the corridor outside the chamber, two nods that carried the weight of an entire shift in alignment, this was the actual moment. Everything else would be paperwork. Harry walked out of the Wizengamot chamber, through the corridor, past clusters of ministry officials who stepped back to give him room without quite realizing they were doing it, toward the lift, toward the atrium, toward the next thing. Caladulch at his hip. His mother's ring on his finger. His friends at his back. The crown still waiting in the vault in Somerset. Not yet. But the ground had shifted. Everyone in that building could feel it, and the ones who didn't know what they were feeling would figure it out soon enough. Harry rode the lift up through the Ministry of Magic, and the doors opened on the atrium, and he walked out into the world he was changing. Chapter 5, What Wars Are Really Made of. The intelligence came from Luna. Not through any dramatic revelation, she simply appeared in the kitchen of Potter's End on Wednesday morning while Harry was eating toast, set a folded piece of parchment on the table beside his plate, and said, Daddy's contact at the Department of Mysteries says there's movement near the Longbottom properties. Not the hall itself. The secondary estate in Northumberland. 3 nights from now. Harry looked at the parchment. It was a hand-drawn map in Xenophilius Lovegood's distinctive style, slightly imprecise in ways that somehow resolved into accuracy if you stopped trying to read it conventionally. The secondary Longbottom estate was marked, along with what appeared to be approach vectors and a note that read, 11 confirmed, possibly more, objective unclear but not retrieval, too many for retrieval. Your dad's contact, Harry said. How reliable. He was wrong about the crumplehorn snorkack, Luna said, sitting down and pouring herself tea. But he's never been wrong about Death Eaters. Harry passed the map to Hermione, who had come downstairs at the sound of voices and was now reading it over his shoulder in the particular focused way she had at 8 in the morning when she hadn't had coffee yet and was compensating with pure cognition. 11, she said. If it's accurate. It's accurate, Harry said. She looked at him. You sound certain. I feel certain. He held up a hand before she could qualify that. I know. But I've learned to distinguish between the kind of certain that's wishful thinking and the kind that's something else. He picked up the map again. This is a test. Voldemort isn't attacking Longbottom Hall because he wants to destroy it. He's attacking a secondary property because he wants to see how I respond. Whether I run to Dumbledore. Whether I defend or retreat. Whether the claim is real or ceremonial. Neville walked in from the back garden, mud on his boots, looking like he'd been up for hours. He'd taken to spending mornings outside, Harry had noticed, something about the amplified magic needing physical grounding, though Neville himself described it only as needing air. He saw the map and came to the table without being asked. He looked at it for a long time. Northumberland, he said. Yes. My grandmother's mother grew up there. His voice was even. There's a library in the East Wing. 300 years of Longbottom records. He looked up at Harry. He wants to burn it. He wants to show the old families what happens to houses that align with me, Harry said. That's what this is. The kitchen was quiet for a moment except for the house's habitual sounds, the settling of old stone, the particular clockwork creak of a place that had been kept meticulously for 15 years by enchantments that had never stopped working. We're not letting him burn it, Neville said. It was not a question and it was not a request. It was a statement of plain fact delivered with the quiet finality of someone who has finished weighing something and set it down. No, Harry agreed. We're not. The planning took the rest of Wednesday and most of Thursday. Harry ran it like a briefing, not because he was performing authority but because structured thinking was what the situation required, and he'd been in enough dangerous situations to know that the ones that went wrong weren't usually the ones where people were outmatched. They were the ones where people were underprepared or unclear about their objectives. He spread the map across the dining room table and everyone gathered around it, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Ginny, and Luna, who attended these sessions with the air of someone confirming things they already knew rather than learning them. He'd also asked Daphne Greengrass, because her family's knowledge of Death Eater operational patterns was potentially useful, and she'd come without comment and immediately pointed out 2 approach routes he'd missed. The property itself, Harry said to Neville. Layout. Neville produced his own map, more precise, clearly based on family documents. Main building is L-shaped. East wing, where the library is the older section, stone, probably resistant to fiend fire in the lower floors but the upper floors have wood frame construction that would go fast. The grounds are enclosed on 3 sides by a river on the north and mature woodland on the east and west. The south is open, roughly 400 meters of lawn to the road. They'll come from the south, Harry said. Open ground, easiest approach. Which means they expect the south to be undefended. So we defend from the east and west, Ron said. No. Harry traced the map. We let them come from the south. He looked up at the faces around the table. If we seal the east and west approaches first, they have one exit. If we have people positioned here, he indicated the tree line on either side of the lawn, then the moment they engage on the south approach, we close the exits. Surrounding 11 Death Eaters, Hermione said carefully. Give or take. Harry, I know the risks. I've counted them. He looked at her steadily. We're not going to have an opportunity like this in a controlled environment very often. 11 Death Eaters in an enclosed position, initiating an attack on a property we've prepared, we will never have better odds than this. He paused. I'm not doing this to be reckless. I'm doing this because if Voldemort's test is whether we'll defend our own, the answer has to be yes, and it has to be demonstrative. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, positions. I'm on the south approach, front and center, Harry said. No hedging, no qualification. Obviously, Ginny said, with the tone of someone who had accepted this a while ago. Neville east tree line, because it's his property and he knows the terrain. Ginny west because she's fast and the west approach has more broken ground, it needs someone who can move without thinking about footing. Ron, you're with me on the south because you've got the best tactical eye in a moving fight and I need someone who can call what I can't see from the center. He looked at Hermione. I need you inside. In the library. Inside, she repeated. With the records. If something goes wrong and they breach the building, I need someone who can set secondary wards and protect the contents. He held her gaze. You're also the best chance of capturing rather than neutralizing, you think faster than anyone out there about alternative approaches, and in the middle of a fight I want that option available. She held his gaze for a long moment. He could see her running the argument against it, and then running the logic again, and then accepting it with the particular grace of someone who disagrees but recognizes good reasoning. I want communication spells, she said. Two-way, continuous. With all of you. Already planned, Harry said. Luna, I'll be on the roof, Luna said pleasantly. Everyone looked at her. The northeast corner of the roof has the best sightline over all 3 approach routes, she said, as if this were obvious. And nobody ever looks up. She was entirely right on both counts. Daphne, Harry said. I'm not a soldier, Daphne said directly. I know. I don't want a soldier. I want someone who knows how Death Eaters think when they realize they're in a trap. When they break, which way do they break? Who do they sacrifice first? Who tries to negotiate? He looked at her. You grew up watching these people at dinner parties. That's not a small thing. Daphne was quiet for a moment. They sacrifice the newer recruits first, she said. Anyone who was brought in after the return, they're disposable and they know it. The core group, the ones who served last time, the marked ones, they'll try to regroup to the leader. Whoever's commanding. She paused. If you identify and isolate the commander early, the rest fractures faster than you'd expect. Can you do that? Identify the commander from a safe position? Yes, she said. Not bravado. Just competence. Then you're with Luna, Harry said. Roof. Daphne blinked at this. Nobody looks up, Luna said again, helpfully. They arrived at the Northumberland estate Friday afternoon to prepare the ground before nightfall. The property was exactly as Neville's map suggested, the L-shaped house of pale northern stone, the river running dark beyond the north tree line, the expanse of south lawn stretching to a low road hedge. Empty, but not abandoned, the household wards were active and had kept the building in good order, though the garden showed the slight wildness of something maintained by magic rather than human attention. They spent 3 hours warding. This was Hermione's domain and she approached it the way she approached everything she was genuinely good at, without showboating, without explaining what she was doing unless someone asked, with the focused intensity of someone working at the edge of their considerable ability. She used the ward schematics from Lily Potter's vault notebooks, which she'd spent the past week absorbing, and what she built was layered and subtle, not the obvious defensive walls that a standard ward scheme produced, but something that concealed itself, that looked like nothing until it was needed. Harry worked alongside her on the outer perimeter, not directing but contributing, the Pendragon magic he was still getting used to, still learning the edges of, turned out to be extraordinarily effective for anchoring wards to property. He pressed his palm to the south gate stone and felt the ward take hold with a solidity that surprised even Hermione when she tested it. "Your blood resonates with the property magic," she said, hand on the gate stone, feeling the work they'd done. "Not just here, everywhere in Britain where old magical families have properties, the land itself has a kind of memory. And you're connected to it," Harry said. "Like a key that fits all the locks." She looked at her notes. "Your mother understood this. There are 12 pages in her notebooks about it." She looked up at him. "She was trying to build something larger than just your protection. She was trying to build a framework." "She built the foundation," Harry said. "We're building the rest." Hermione looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the ward notes and kept working, and Harry could tell from the set of her shoulders that she was moved and didn't want to show it in the middle of a task that required precision. Neville worked the east tree line with the purposeful quiet of someone on their own ground. He moved through the trees with an ease that had nothing to do with familiarity and everything to do with the land responding to him. Branches that should have snagged his robes didn't, shadows fell obligingly, the forest's own complex root system seemed to arrange itself to quiet his footsteps. He planted himself at the tree line's edge as the sun went down and stood there like something that had grown there. Ginny took the west approach and disappeared into it with the professionalism of someone who had been playing in terrain like this since she was old enough to follow her brothers into the field. She came back to report once, noted 2 positions she wanted to use, and went back out without further comment. Ron walked the south lawn twice, in the darkening evening, counting paces, testing sight lines, noting ground variations. He had a piece of parchment that was filling up with notations in his chess shorthand, a private language of strategic positioning that Harry had learned to read sideways, catching the spatial logic in the grid of marks. Luna and Daphne climbed to the roof as the last of the daylight faded, and settled in the northeast corner with disillusionment charms and the particular equanimity of 2 people who had nothing in common and had decided this was interesting rather than problematic. They waited. They came at 2 in the morning. Harry felt them before he heard them, a wrongness in the air that was probably the Pendragon sensitivity, the way a deep-rooted tree might feel approaching weather before a normal person would notice a cloud. He was standing at the south gate with Ron, both of them disillusioned, and the feeling came to him like a pressure change. He pressed 2 fingers to his throat where the communication spell was anchored. "They're close. South approach, as expected. 2 minutes." Hermione's voice, low and clear, came back through the spell, inside. "Wards are up. Neville, ready. Ginny, ready. Luna, I can see them. 13. Not 11. Daphne, Commander is Rookwood. He's 3rd from the left. Grey robes, moves with his weight forward. The 2 flanking him are his guards, they'll stay within a body's length." Harry filed it. 13. 2 more than expected. Not a problem. He let them reach the south gate. The gate was open. He'd opened it deliberately, removed the obvious ward signs, made the approach look like exactly what they expected, an undefended secondary property that no one was paying attention to on a Friday night in Northumberland. They came through the gate with the particular efficiency of people who had done this before, spreading into a loose approach formation across the lawn, wands out, moving quietly. Harry waited until all 13 were through the gate and 20 meters onto the lawn. Then he cancelled his disillusionment charm, stood in the middle of the south approach, and said, in a voice that was not loud but carried completely, "Evening." 13 Death Eaters stopped. The pause was approximately 1 second, and in that second Harry could feel the recalibration happening across the group, the shock of a person where no person should be, the reassessment of the situation, the first question from whoever was thinking fastest, "Trap?" Then Rookwood said, "Potter," in a voice of clinical recognition, and sent a curse that Harry sidestepped without rushing, letting it pass close enough that the heat of it registered, and then Harry sent back something that was not a standard defensive spell and not a standard offensive spell but something closer to what it felt like when he put his hand on the Northumberland gate stone that afternoon. A pulse of Pendragon magic channeled through his wand that hit Rookwood's guard on the left. And threw him 20 feet backward so cleanly that it looked almost gentle. It was not gentle. It was simply extremely precise. Ron broke from the right, fast and low, drawing fire from the outer edges of the formation. He was not trying to duel, he was moving, constant moving, drawing attention and redirecting it with the spatial intelligence of a natural tactician who understood that his value in this fight was not trading curses but controlling where the fight was happening. The east tree line lit up. Neville came out of the darkness, and he was not the Neville who'd broken rules in first year or the Neville who'd kept fighting with a broken nose in the Department of Mysteries. He was something that the Longbottom amplification had been building toward for a week and hadn't fully arrived until this moment, when the ground under his feet was his family's ground and the people on it had come to burn his family's history. He hit the eastern flank of the formation like a force of nature, not loud, not dramatic, just devastatingly effective. His spell work was precise in a way that botanical study produces in people who understand the principle of applying exactly the right intervention to exactly the right point. 3 Death Eaters on the east flank went down in the space of 8 seconds, not from a single overwhelming spell but from a rapid sequence of targeted, perfectly chosen magic that gave each of them no space to recover. One of the remaining 10 broke west. Ginny was waiting. Harry had watched Ginny Weasley play Quidditch for 5 years and had a solid academic understanding of how fast she was. Watching her fight was something else entirely. She moved across the broken west ground as if the terrain were helping her, which he suspected it was in some passive way, and she was in the fight before the Death Eater she'd targeted had completed his first spell, and she ended it in 3 precise, economical moves that Harry filed away under. Never underestimate Ginny Weasley, even though he'd stopped doing that years ago. Rookwood was still standing. Still controlled. Still thinking. Harry gave him credit. Most commanders, in a situation that had gone wrong this fast, would either freeze or rage. Rookwood did neither. He pulled his 2 guards tight, assessed the changed situation with professional speed, and made the correct tactical decision: abandon the objective, break south, get out. Harry stepped into his path. Rookwood sent 3 curses in rapid succession, dark, serious curses, not dueling club standards, the kind thrown by people who have used them on real targets. Harry deflected the first 2 and let the third break on a wandless shield that surprised both of them. He suspected him because he hadn't entirely known he could do that, Rookwood because shields erected without a wand at that speed were not something he'd apparently planned for. "This is over, Rookwood," Harry said. "You're 16 years old," Rookwood said, with the very specific contempt of someone who is angry and covering it with disdain. "People keep saying that," Harry said, and disarmed him. Clean, hard, no flourish. Rookwood's wand left his hand and hit the lawn, and Harry caught it without looking, which was partly luck and partly that the Pendragon's sensitivity to magic meant he could feel a wand in flight the way you might feel a change in air pressure, and he'd been practicing. The 2 guards looked at Rookwood's empty hand. Looked at Harry. Looked at the collapsed formation around them, 8 of their number on the ground, 3 more contained by Ginny and Neville's ongoing positions. Rookwood disarmed, the entire approach flanked and closed. They put their hands up. "Good choice," Ron said, appearing from the dark with the matter-of-fact quality of someone marking a game move. Harry looked at the south lawn. 13 Death Eaters had come through the gate. 8 were down and would be shortly bound. 2 had surrendered. Neville had 3 contained. He looked at Rookwood, who was standing very still with the expression of someone doing extremely unpleasant mathematics. "You have 2 choices," Harry said. "You come with us willingly, you're bound, and you'll be treated appropriately. Or you make this more complicated and we have a longer night than either of us wants." He held Rookwood's gaze. "I'm not going to hurt you unnecessarily. That's not what this is." Rookwood looked at him for a long moment. Harry could see the calculation, the weighing of options, the assessment of the person in front of him, the painful adjustment to a set of facts that hadn't matched any prediction he'd walked in with. "The Dark Lord will," Rookwood started. "I know what he'll do," Harry said. "I know you know what he'll do too. That's why you're standing here instead of running. He paused. I'm going to offer you a different set of consequences. That's not a trick. It's just a better option. He kept his voice level. Come with us. Rookwood came. The cleanup took until 4 in the morning. Binding, documentation, secure containment. Harry had set up a holding protocol with Amelia Bones in advance, a specific Auror contact who could be reached at any hour without the information passing through the compromised channels they'd identified. She had 2 Aurors at the estate before 3:30, moving with the efficient quiet of professionals who had been briefed thoroughly and weren't wasting time on questions. Harry stood on the south lawn while the work happened around him, watching the sky go from black to the very first suggestion of gray that precedes dawn by an hour, and ran a quiet internal audit. Everyone was standing. That was the first and most important fact. Ron had a burn on his left forearm from a curse that had clipped him in the early seconds, not serious, already treated by Hermione, who had stocked the property with healing supplies with characteristic foresight. He was currently drinking tea from a flask and directing the documentation process with the authority of someone who had slipped naturally into a coordination role and wore it easily. Ginny had a cut above her eyebrow that she dismissed with a wave when Harry had asked about it, and was currently having what appeared to be a very calm post-combat debrief with Daphne Greengrass about the specific tactical patterns Rookwood's unit had used. Daphne was taking notes. This had apparently been their arrangement. Neville was sitting on the front steps of the house. Harry went and sat beside him. He didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did Neville. The sky continued its slow change. Somewhere in the North Tree-line, an early bird was testing a tentative note. The library? Harry asked. Safe, Neville said. Hermione's doing an inventory, she says. She couldn't not. Of course she couldn't. Harry was quiet for a moment. How are you? Neville turned his hands over in the early light, looking at them, the way he had in the Leaky Cauldron booth after Gringotts, but differently now. Not with the stunned recognition of someone discovering a new thing, but with the settled acknowledgement of someone who has confirmed something. I knew they were going to come here, he said. Not like Luna knew, I didn't have information. I just knew. Like the land was telling me. He was quiet for a moment. I never felt that before. You weren't listening for it before, Harry said. Neville considered that. My parents used to bring me here, he said. When I was very small. Before, he stopped. Started again with the careful steadiness of someone who has been navigating around a difficult place for so long they know every stone of the path. I remember the river. And the trees. I thought it was just a memory. He paused. It's not just a memory. Harry understood what he meant, the connection to the land, to the property, to the inheritance that was more than documents and galleons. He'd felt it himself, walking into Potter's End for the first time. The sense of something recognizing you. Your parents would be proud of tonight, Harry said. It was the kind of thing that could land badly, said wrong. He didn't say it wrong. Neville was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, just once, and the quality of the quiet changed from weighted to something more like settled. One thing, Neville said. Rookwood. Before you stepped out on the lawn, when they were coming through the gate. Were you ever worried? Harry thought about it honestly. No, he said. Neville looked at him. Why not? Because I'd prepared as well as I could, I had the best people I know in position, and I'd already decided what mattered enough to fight for. He looked at the south lawn where the last traces of the night's work were being cleared away. Worry is for when you haven't decided yet. Once you've decided, it just gets replaced by what you need to do. Neville absorbed this. Hermione's going to want to write that down. Probably already did, Harry said. Luna came down from the roof as the sun properly broke the horizon, carrying 2 cups of tea she'd apparently made on the roof somehow, offering one to Daphne and one to Harry in sequence. Rookwood was the easiest one, she said, sitting on the steps beside Neville with the quiet of someone who has been watching the night from a high place and has had time to think. The ones the Dark Lord sends next won't be. No, Harry agreed. He's going to send Bellatrix, Luna said. Not because she's the most strategic choice. Because she's the message. She looked at Harry with her wide, clear eyes. He's done being surprised. He's going to be angry next. Good, Harry said, with a steadiness that made Luna tilt her head slightly. Most people wouldn't consider that good. Angry people make mistakes, Harry said. Voldemort doesn't make many. But angry Voldemort makes more than patient Voldemort. He drank his tea. And Bellatrix isn't a strategist. She's a weapon. She's terrifying and she's dangerous, but she's not subtle. He paused. Which means when she comes, we'll know she's coming. Luna nodded slowly. The Nargles agree, she said, which was apparently a sufficient seal of approval. Hermione appeared at the front door with a notebook, a detailed inventory of the East Wing library, and the expression of someone who has been in a room full of 300-year-old documents and has emerged changed by the experience. The library is completely intact, she said. Every record. There's material in there that I suspect hasn't been catalogued in 100 years. She looked at Neville. There are 2 letters from Albus Dumbledore to your grandfather, dated 1932, discussing the political landscape in terms that, she stopped herself. We'll go through it properly. But Neville. Your family has been important for a very long time in ways that got buried under everything else. Neville's expression was something Harry couldn't quite name, a complex layering of grief and anger and something new, something that might have been the beginning of a long overdue reckoning with what his family actually was beneath the tragedy of what had happened to them. I know, Neville said. I'm starting to understand that. Ron came around the corner of the house with the 2 Aurors, all 3 of them having the satisfied no-nonsense quality of people who have completed a job well. He looked at Harry. 13 in custody, all documented, formal charges drafted under Bones's framework. She says the evidence is clean enough that even with the compromised channels it'll hold up. The Pendragon documentation changes the legal threshold for evidence admissibility. He paused. And Rookwood is talking. Harry looked at him. Not under duress, Ron said quickly. He asked to. Specifically asked for you. They put Rookwood in the East Wing study while the Aurors dealt with the others, and Harry went in alone. Hermione objected, not strongly, but clearly, and he understood the objection and went in alone anyway, because some conversations require the specific weight of one person's attention. Rookwood was sitting with his hands bound in front of him, looking at the study with the expression of someone who hasn't stopped calculating since the lawn. He was older than Harry had expected up close, late 50s, grey at the temples, with the lean precision of a former unspeakable, which he'd been, once, before Voldemort. The kind of intelligence that makes someone more dangerous and simultaneously more capable of recognizing when they're beaten. You're not what I expected, Rookwood said. I know, Harry said, sitting down across from him. What did you expect? Lucky. Instinctive. Protected by old magic but not, he gestured at the space between them. Not this. What's this? Strategy, Rookwood said flatly. The trap on the south lawn was beautiful. Not in an aesthetic sense, in a mechanical sense. Every variable was covered. That's not natural talent, Potter. That's hours of planning. He looked at Harry with the unsettling directness of someone who has assessed many people and found them predictable. Where did you learn? Chess, Harry said simply. And people smarter than me who don't explain things, they just do them and I watch. Rookwood was quiet for a moment. The Pendragon claim, he said. Real, Harry said. I know it's real. I felt it the moment you stepped out of that disillusionment charm. Rookwood's voice was very even. There's a resonance to the old bloodlines when they're active. Unspeakables used to measure it. I've felt it twice in my life, once from a very old portrait and once from a ward stone that hadn't been touched in 200 years. He looked at Harry. Tonight was different from both of those. You're not just carrying the bloodline. You've integrated it. Harry said nothing. The Dark Lord is afraid of you, Rookwood said. No, he's not. Not of you specifically. Rookwood's precise voice was careful. Of what you represent. He built his power on the premise that there was no legitimate authority above him, that the ministry was a bureaucracy he could manipulate, the old families were vessels for an ideology he defined, and the only power that mattered was power he held. He looked at Harry steadily. A king changes the fundamental architecture of that argument. You're not just stronger than him. You're structurally incompatible with his entire framework. Harry said, "Is that why you're talking to me?" Rookwood looked at his bound hands. I served the Dark Lord because I believed in the ideology. Not the cruelty, I was never comfortable with the cruelty. But the premise, that blood heritage carries weight, that magical Britain should be led by its oldest lines, that the ministry's post-statute structures had hollowed out what we were. He looked up. You're the legitimate heir of the oldest line in Britain. You've just claimed what he's been pretending to represent. A pause. He can't argue with that. And neither can I. Harry studied him for a long moment. What are you offering? Everything, Rookwood said. Every piece of operational intelligence I have. Current structure, command hierarchy, planned operations. His movements over the past year. He held Harry's gaze. I was an unspeakable for 16 years. I know how to organize and present intelligence clearly. What I have is, substantial. In exchange. Fair trial. Not a foregone conclusion, a fair trial. I know what I did. I'm not asking to escape it. I'm asking for it to be examined honestly. Harry thought about this. He thought about Sirius, who hadn't gotten a trial. Who'd gone to Azkaban on someone's assurance rather than evidence and stayed there for 12 years. Amelia Bones, Harry said. She's the one who can ensure a fair trial. Not me. I can advocate for it, document the agreement, but she's the authority on process. He looked at Rookwood. I want the intelligence. All of it. And I want it in a form that Hermione Granger can work with, she'll be the one organizing it. Rookwood blinked. Your friend. My strategist, Harry said. A brief pause. The Granger girl, Rookwood said, and there was something in his voice that was just on the edge of being surprise. I've been briefed on all of your known associates. The assessment was, he stopped. Wrong. Harry said. Incomplete, Rookwood said. Significantly incomplete. He straightened in his chair. Yes. I'll provide everything in organized form. To your strategist. He said it with the particular respect of one competent person acknowledging another. Then we have an agreement, Harry said. He stood up. I'll have the formal documentation ready within 24 hours. Until then, you stay here, more comfortable than a ministry cell, and I have people I trust on the property. He paused at the door. One more thing. Rookwood waited. The ministry plant. Department head level. Harry turned to look at him. Who? Rookwood didn't hesitate. Thaddeus Bartemius Crouch Morrison, he said. Senior Undersecretary to the Department of International Magical Cooperation. He's been passing information to the Dark Lord's network since 1994. Harry held his gaze for a moment. Thank you, he said. He walked out of the study, closed the door quietly behind him, and leaned against the corridor wall for approximately 3 seconds, running a rapid internal accounting of what had just changed. Then he found Ron, who was in the kitchen, and said, Get Hermione. I need her to start on something. The intelligence? Ron guessed. That, and a letter to Arthur Weasley. He needs a name. They stayed at the Northumberland estate through Saturday, working. The intelligence Rookwood began providing was substantial enough that Hermione set up a dedicated workspace in the East Wing and didn't leave it for most of the day except to eat, which she did while reading, which was a habit the others had long since accepted as simply how Hermione ate during important work. Harry spent the afternoon walking the property, not strategically, not planning, just walking. He'd found, over the past 2 weeks, that his thinking organized itself differently when he moved, that the Pendragon sensitivity worked better in motion than in stillness, that there was something in the physical contact with old magical land that helped him see clearly. He ended up by the river in the late afternoon, sitting on a stone at its edge, listening to the water. The north tree-line was above him, the estate visible at his back, the sky doing something expansive and northern over the hills. He thought about Monday's session and what it had accomplished. The record changed, the maths demonstrated, the first public moves made. He thought about Rookwood's intelligence and what it would yield, ministry plants named and documented, operational structure mapped, the first real look inside Voldemort's current organization rather than the incomplete picture they'd been working from. He thought about what Luna had said. Bellatrix is next. He thought about what Bellatrix Lestrange had done to Neville's parents, to Frank and Alice Longbottom, who were currently in St. Mungo's hospital staring at ceilings and offering candy wrappers to their son on the rare visits when Neville could bear to go. He thought about Sirius falling through the veil and the specific silence that followed. He let himself sit with both of those. Not to be paralyzed by them, he'd been paralyzed by grief once and it had cost him things he couldn't afford to pay again. Just to let them be what they were, to acknowledge the weight of them fully, so that when he moved it would be with clear eyes rather than suppressed pressure. The river ran over its stones and said nothing, which was exactly what he needed it to do. Ginny appeared from the tree-line and came to sit on the next stone. She'd done this before, appeared where Harry was without making a production of it, comfortable with whatever silence was already there. "The others are wondering if you want dinner," she said. "In a bit." She nodded. They sat quietly for a moment. "Good fight last night," she said. "Yes. Better team," she said. He looked at her. She was watching the river with the expression of someone who means what they say and doesn't bother decorating it. He thought about the 4 years of not quite looking at this particular Weasley, the way she'd grown from the starstruck girl in King's Cross into someone who had fought in the Department of Mysteries and dueled a Death Eater and was currently sitting on a river stone discussing tactical performance with the same directness she brought to Quidditch analysis. "Ginny," he said. She looked at him. There were things he could say. He chose the one that was true and simple and sufficient. "I'm glad you're here." She studied him for a moment with those direct brown eyes that didn't offer easy readings. Then she said, "I know. I'm glad I'm here too." She stood up, brushed off her robes. "Dinner, Potter. Hermione gets abstract when she's hungry and we need her concrete for at least another 3 hours." She walked back up the bank toward the house, and Harry watched her go, and felt something settle in him that was distinct from the strategic satisfaction of last night and the Pendragon certainty of the past 2 weeks, quieter than both, more personal, more like the word forward than any other word he had for it. He stood up from the stone. The river ran on. He walked back to his people. The letter arrived Sunday morning from a source Harry didn't recognize, a very small, very fast owl that dropped it on the breakfast table and left before anyone could examine it. The parchment was unmarked. The handwriting was precise and entirely unfamiliar. It contained 11 words. "We need to discuss terms. The old rules no longer apply." TMR. Harry read it twice. Passed it to Hermione. Watched her read it and go very still. "He wants to negotiate," she said. "He wants me to think he wants to negotiate," Harry said. "Those are different things. What are you going to do?" Harry thought about a man who had been afraid of death for so long that he'd split his soul to avoid it. Who had built his entire existence on the principle that he was unkillable, uncontestable, the singular force that no authority could address. Who was now writing 11-word letters to a 16-year-old king in the Somerset morning. "I'm going to write back," Harry said. He picked up his quill. He thought for a moment, not long, because the answer came clearly, with the kind of clarity that only arrives when you already know what you are and what you stand for. Then he wrote, "There are no terms. There is only this: stop, and face what you've done, or continue, and face me. One of those ends better than the other. I'll let you decide which. HJP, Lord Pendragon." He sealed it with the Pendragon seal and handed it to the owl, which had apparently waited despite itself. The owl took it and left. Ron, who had read over his shoulder, was quiet for a moment. "That's either going to work brilliantly," he said, "or start the most dangerous thing we've ever been part of." "It's both," Harry said, and poured himself more tea. Chapter 6, The King's First Decree. Voldemort's reply arrived on Monday morning. Same small owl, same unmarked parchment. This time it was 2 words. Interesting choice. Harry read it at breakfast, showed it to no one, and put it in his pocket. He understood what it meant: not agreement, not retreat, but recalibration. The reply was Voldemort acknowledging that Harry had made a move he hadn't predicted, on a board he hadn't fully mapped yet, and was taking time to understand the new geometry before he responded. It was the reply of a very intelligent person who had been surprised and wasn't stupid enough to pretend otherwise. That bought time. Not much, but some. He'd been thinking about what to do with it since Sunday. The meeting that morning was different from the others. Not the inner circle, something larger, more deliberate. Harry had spent Saturday night and most of Sunday writing invitations, each one sealed with the Pendragon signet, each one addressed by name. He'd sent 14. 12 arrived at Potter's End by 10 o'clock Monday morning. They came by flue, by portkey, by apparition to the south gate. Some came alone, some with a single companion. The Greengrass patriarch, Aldrich Greengrass, 53, a careful man with careful eyes who moved like someone perpetually assessing exit routes, came with his daughter. Augusta Longbottom arrived in full formal robes with a hat that appeared to be a deliberate architectural statement, took one long look at Harry, and said, "Neville told me you were formidable. I told him not to use words he couldn't support with evidence. I was wrong." Then she sat down and produced her own notebook. Griselda Marchbanks, who Harry recognized from the Wisengamot session, came at precisely the stated time and brought nothing but herself and the particular authority of someone who had been sitting in rooms full of important people since before most of them were born. Tiberius Ogden, another Wisengamot member Harry had identified from Hermione's research as independently inclined and not yet committed to any of the existing power structures, came with the slightly dazzled expression of a man who had received a Pendragon sealed invitation and hadn't quite processed what that meant until he was already on the portkey. The Abbott family head. 2 members of the Bones extended family. A witch named Emmeline Vance who was in the order but had, according to Arthur's quiet intelligence work, been increasingly uncomfortable with the level of information being kept from the people doing the actual fighting. A wizard named Hector Dagworth Granger, no relation to Hermione, who had checked immediately and slightly wistfully, who was the senior partner of Britain's most significant independent magical law firm and had been sent, it emerged, by 3 other families who hadn't come themselves but wanted legal representation in the room. Amelia Bones sat at the table's right hand, which told everyone who knew her that this was not simply a meeting she'd been invited to. The 2 who hadn't come, the Parkinson family head, who had sent polite regrets and the very specific kind of apology that meant not yet but possibly soon. And Lord Knott, who had sent nothing, which told Harry more than regrets would have. Harry stood at the head of the table and looked at the room. He didn't have notes. He'd thought about what he wanted to say for 2 days and had deliberately not written any of it down, because written remarks produce performance and performance produce distance, and what he needed this room to be was a conversation. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I want to start with something that isn't a political statement, it's just a fact: this war has been badly managed for a year. Not by the people fighting it, by the institutional frameworks around it. The ministry has been compromised from inside, information has been rationed to people who needed all of it, and the population of magical Britain has been systematically misled about the level of danger they're in." He paused. "I'm not here to be your savior. I have genuine contempt for that framing. I'm here because I have legal standing that nobody else in this room has, I have intelligence that changes the picture, and I have a set of proposals that I think are worth your consideration. He looked around the table. I also have tea, if anyone hasn't helped themselves. Augusta Longbottom, who had already helped herself, made a sound that was probably approval. He talked for 30 minutes. Not a speech, more like thinking aloud to people he was inviting to think with him. He laid out the Wizengamot situation, the Ministry infiltration intelligence from Rookwood, the operational picture Hermione had built from 2 days of working through everything they had. He talked about what the Pendragon standing actually meant in legal and practical terms, what it could do, specifically, that no other mechanism in current British magical law could do. He talked about what he wanted to build. Not a shadow ministry. Not a parallel structure that competed with the existing institutions. Something more fundamental than that, a restoration of the oldest accountability frameworks, the ones that the Pendragon Compact encoded, that required any governing body to answer to a sovereign standard that existed independently of whoever currently held office. A check that couldn't be bought, compromised, or bullied. The ministry will still exist, he said. The Wizengamot will still exist. I'm not interested in replacing them would take years of political warfare that Voldemort would win simply by surviving it. What I'm interested in is making them answerable again. To a standard they can't rewrite by committee. He paused. The Pendragon Compact gives me the legal basis for 3 specific instruments that no one has used in 900 years. A sovereign inquiry, which compels full disclosure from any ministry department regardless of classification. A royal compact seat in the Wizengamot, which carries 3 votes and a right of veto on any motion that would compromise the magical realm's fundamental security. And a king's peace, a formal declaration that places named individuals and properties under direct Pendragon protection, which in practice means that any action against them constitutes an action against the sovereign claim and triggers the full legal weight of the compact. The room was very still. Hector Dagworth Granger spoke first, because lawyers speak when the relevant clauses have been cited. These instruments haven't been invoked in 900 years, he said carefully. There will be legal challenges to their current validity. The compact has been continuously held in Gringotts as an active legal document since its signing, Harry said. The goblins have recognized it as operative for 900 years and have never filed a dormancy notice. Under banking accord law, continuous goblin recognition establishes unbroken legal continuity. He looked at Dagworth Granger. Your firm has 3 goblin consultants. I'd suggest asking them. Dagworth Granger blinked, then made a note. Aldrich Greengrass said, without preamble, you mentioned intelligence that changes the picture. What specifically? Harry glanced at Amelia Bones, who had been waiting for exactly this question. She opened the folder in front of her and passed copies around the table, clean summaries Hermione had prepared, organized by subject, clear enough that a layperson could follow them. 7 ministry infiltrators, named and documented, Bones said. Including a senior undersecretary confirmed as a direct asset of Voldemort's network. We also have a partial map of Death Eater operational hierarchy and planned movements covering the next 6 weeks. She paused. This intelligence came to us through channels that I have personally verified. The source's credibility is high. I'm prepared to stake my professional reputation on it. Griselda Marchbanks was reading the summary with the attention of someone for whom reading complex documents quickly was a lifelong professional skill. You've already acted on some of this, she said. Northumberland. Yes, Harry said. 13 taken into custody. She looked up. Without casualties on your side. Without casualties, Harry confirmed. How? Said Emmeline Vance, and it was the most direct question asked in the room so far, which told Harry something useful about how her mind worked. Planning, Harry said simply. Good people in the right positions. He paused. We knew they were coming because we have better intelligence networks than Voldemort expects us to have. We prepared the ground rather than reacting to it. And the people I brought are genuinely capable, which matters more than anything else. He looked at Vance directly. This is what I'm asking you to support. Not me as a symbol. This approach, prepared, intelligence-led, resourced properly, treating the people fighting this war as assets rather than expendable symbols. Emmeline Vance was quiet for a moment. The order, she said. I have a meeting with Dumbledore this afternoon, Harry said. He'll know about this meeting before it happens. I'm not doing this behind his back. He held Vance's gaze. But I need structures that I own. Not because I distrust him, because I've learned the hard way what it costs to be dependent on someone else's judgment for your own safety. That lesson isn't directed at Dumbledore specifically. It's just true. Vance looked at him steadily. Then, I've been waiting for someone to say that plainly for about a year. She paused. I'm in. Around the table, in the next 10 minutes, 12 people said variations of the same thing. Some were formal. Dagworth Granger spoke of legal representation and documentation requirements. Some were brief. Augusta Longbottom simply said, obviously, in a tone that indicated she considered the alternative beneath discussion and reminded Harry powerfully of Neville. Aldrich Greengrass said it most carefully, with the most conditions attached, and Harry appreciated the conditions because they told him Greengrass was engaging with the reality of what he was agreeing to rather than the idea of it. When the room had finished, Harry looked around it. One more thing, he said. The King's Peace. I want to invoke it immediately for 3 categories, anyone currently at risk of Death Eater action due to their alignment with this effort. The magical families that have formally committed to this table today. And every student currently enrolled at Hogwarts School. He paused. I'm invoking it as a declaration of protection, not as a political maneuver. Voldemort has shown a willingness to target students. The compact makes targeting anyone under King's Peace legally equivalent to an act of war against the sovereign claim, which triggers a different response threshold than what he's currently operating under. The room was quiet. That's a significant escalation, Dagworth Granger said. Voldemort escalated on Thursday when he sent 13 Death Eaters to burn a family library, Harry said. I'm establishing a legal framework that matches the reality of what he's doing. The escalation is his. He looked around the table. I need the room's consent for the peace. It requires 6 noble house co-signatories to invoke formally. 6 hands went up without hesitation, which was more than he'd needed and considerably faster than he'd expected. The meeting with Dumbledore was at 3 o'clock, in the headmaster's office, and unlike their previous conversations it had a quality of equals rather than a quality of a student meeting in authority. Dumbledore listened without interrupting while Harry walked him through the morning, the assembled families, the intelligence, Rookwood, the King's Peace invocation, the 3 compact instruments. He sat with his hands folded on his desk and his half-moon spectacles precisely centered on his nose and his expression doing the complicated thing it did when he was simultaneously processing new information and revising existing frameworks. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The King's Peace, he said. You've included the students. Every student, Harry confirmed. Voldemort will view it as provocation. Yes. He'll move faster than he planned to, Harry said. Yes. I know. That's what I want. Dumbledore looked at him over his spectacles. He's been setting his own timetable, Harry said. Probing, testing, establishing position. The King's Peace forces his hand. If he moves against Hogwarts or its students, he activates the full compact response, not just political standing, but a magical obligation that every signatory house has now formally endorsed. He either acts within the next month while he thinks he has initiative, or he loses the psychological advantage of the threat itself. Harry held Dumbledore's gaze. I want him to act. On ground I've chosen, with timing I've influenced, not on his timetable. Dumbledore was very still for a long moment. You are, he said carefully, playing a significantly more aggressive game than I anticipated. Than you anticipated for me, Harry said, without aggression. You anticipated me needing guidance. I appreciate the guidance you've given. But the game I'm playing is mine, and I need you to understand that the guidance is advisory now, not directional. The office was quiet. Fawkes made his low sound. The instruments whirred. I made decisions about your life, Dumbledore said, based on what I thought you could bear. I know. I was wrong about what you could bear. I know that too. Harry looked at him directly. I'm not asking you to apologize for it again. I'm asking you to work with who I actually am rather than who you planned for. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked, with the full weight of whatever genuine assessment the old man was capable of. Harry held it without flinching. What do you need from me? Dumbledore asked. And it was, Harry recognized, the first time he'd asked rather than decided. Hogwarts, Harry said. The school defenses, they're good, but they're built on assumptions that haven't been updated in 20 years. I want to work with you and Professor McGonagall on a full assessment of the existing wards and a plan to reinforce them. He paused. And I need the Order on the same intelligence footing as my group. Not pooled command, separate operations, shared intelligence. Two networks that know what the other knows. Moody will object to the structure, Dumbledore said. Moody will respect it once he sees the Northumberland operation, Harry said. He's a professional. He responds to results. Dumbledore was quiet for another moment. Then he did something Harry hadn't seen before. He leaned back in his chair, and the formal authority of the headmaster's posture relaxed, just slightly, into something more human. An old man, tired, reassessing. All right, Dumbledore said. All right, Harry agreed. The rest of the week moved fast. Rookwood's intelligence, fully processed by Hermione and organized into the clear, cross-referenced document set that only she could produce in 72 hours without apparent sleep, went to 3 places simultaneously: Amelia Bones at the DMLE, Arthur Weasley through his ministry network, and Dagworth Granger's firm for independent legal verification. The simultaneous distribution was deliberate, no single point of compromise, no way for the compromised channels to suppress it before it was already in multiple hands. The ministry plants fell within 4 days. Not all at once, Bones was too careful for that, too conscious of evidence chains and legal procedure. But one by one, beginning with Crouch Morrison, who was arrested on Tuesday morning in his own office with what Amelia described in her terse one-line report to Harry as comprehensively sufficient evidence. The others followed in sequence over the next 3 days as the evidence packages Rookwood had provided were verified and acted on. Fudge survived politically, technically, but the no-confidence motion was gathering the signatures it needed from the Wisengamot members who had been at Monday's meeting and had gone back to their colleagues with the quiet urgency of people who had seen something that changed their assessment of the situation. He was not going to survive the autumn session. He knew it. His increasingly erratic public statements, Harry followed them in the Prophet with the focused attention of someone tracking a variable, were the statements of a man who was doing the political equivalent of burning furniture for warmth. Umbridge was quieter than Harry expected, which worried him more than noise would have. She had not made her anticipated challenge to the Pendragon claim's legal status. She had not filed procedural objections. She was simply present in the ministry's corridors, moving between departments, and her silence had the quality of a building's structural silence, not peace, but the pause before something gives way. Harry flagged it to Amelia and let it sit. The Hogwarts ward assessment happened on Thursday, with Harry and McGonagall moving through the castle's defensive architecture while Dumbledore observed and Hermione took notes. McGonagall, who had initially been somewhat formally reserved in Harry's company, not hostile, just the careful recalibration of someone adjusting to a changed dynamic, became significantly less reserved approximately 40 minutes into the assessment when Harry identified a gap in the eastern perimeter ward that had apparently existed for at least 40 years and would have admitted anyone with a confundus charm and 3 minutes of patience. I didn't know about that, she said, staring at the gap Harry was pointing to. It's subtle, he said. You'd need the Pendragon sensitivity to feel it, probably. The ward reads as solid from a standard diagnostic because the outer layer is intact. It's the secondary binding that's failed. He pressed his palm to the wall. The anchor point is here. It needs to be rekeyed to the castle's bedrock wards rather than the surface stone. McGonagall looked at him. Then she looked at the wall. Then she said, "I'll want your methodology documented," in the tone of someone who has just encountered a genuinely interesting problem. "Hermione's already writing it," Harry said. From behind them, Hermione's quill scraped steadily across parchment. By the time they were done, the Hogwarts ward scheme had 14 identified improvements and a priority timeline. Dumbledore contributed 4 suggestions that Harry accepted immediately because they were excellent, which he said without qualification, and Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that had the slightly disarmed quality of someone receiving direct compliments from a person they'd been expecting to be antagonistic. Draco Malfoy found Harry on Friday afternoon. Not sought out, found, which was different. Harry was in the Hogwarts library, which he'd been using as a secondary workspace since the ward assessment, when Draco came through the door with the particular directness of someone who had located where he needed to be and had come there. He sat down across from Harry without being invited, which Harry noted and said nothing about. "My father met with Ragnarok yesterday," Draco said. "I know. I asked Ragnarok to tell me when it happened. The clemency documents are signed." "Yes." Draco was quiet for a moment. He looked like someone who had slept badly for several days and had decided to stop mentioning it. "He gave you everything," Draco said. "More than I expected. He was thorough." "He was," Harry agreed. "It's useful." "He's frightened," Draco said. "Not defensively, just accurately. My father hasn't been frightened in a long time. I think he'd forgotten what it felt like and it's made him," he searched for the word. "Honest." "Fear of the right things can do that," Harry said. Draco looked at him. "You're not going to say something gracious about his cooperation?" "I'm grateful for it," Harry said. "I told him that. It doesn't erase what he did, but it's genuinely useful and I recognize the cost of it." He paused. "That's the most gracious I've got." Something flickered in Draco's expression. "Fair," he said. They sat for a moment in the comfortable silence of the library, which had the particular quality of productive silences, people thinking rather than avoiding speech. "What's it like?" Draco said. Harry looked at him. "The Pendragon thing. All of it." Draco's voice was stripped of its usual careful arrangement. "I grew up being told blood was everything. That lineage was destiny. That the oldest families were," he stopped. "Started differently. And then you walk into Gringotts and you turn out to be the most legitimate bloodline on the British Isles, which is both the most and least surprising thing that's ever happened, and you're just," he gestured at Harry. "Normal about it." "I'm not very normal about it," Harry said. "I'm just not performing it." "What's the difference?" Harry thought about how to say it. "The ring feels like mine," he said. "The sword feels like mine. The vault, the estate, the compact, all of it feels like mine. But it's not," he paused. "It's not the source of anything. It confirms things that were already true. I didn't become someone different when the seal activated. I just got documentation for something that was already the case." Draco was quiet, turning this over. "The ideology you grew up in," Harry said, not cruelly. "Pure-blood supremacy. That framework, it was never about blood, really. It was about fear. Fear of being ordinary, fear of being surpassed, fear of a world that didn't organize itself around the things your family had built their value on." He looked at Draco directly. "I understand the appeal of that framework, Draco. Genuinely. When you don't know who you are, a framework that tells you you're important by birthright is comfortable." Draco looked at the table. "The thing is," Harry said, "you're actually capable. Not because of your blood. Because you're intelligent and precise and you read situations faster than most people twice your age. None of that came from your family name. You developed it despite an environment that rewarded you for the name rather than the ability. Draco was very still. I'm not being charitable, Harry said. I'm being accurate. You're useful to me because of what you can actually do, not what you're called. He paused. And I think you know the difference, even if no one said it plainly before. The library was quiet around them. Late afternoon light through the tall windows, the smell of old books, the distant sound of students somewhere in the castle. My mother, Draco said. She's under King's Peace. Filed Tuesday. It's in the Gringotts record, formally binding, can't be revoked by anything short of a direct sovereign declaration, which means me. Harry held Draco's gaze. She's safe. That doesn't change regardless of what happens with anything else. Draco looked at him for a long moment. He was doing the thing Harry had started to recognize, the internal renegotiation, the updating of a world model that had just received too much new information to process all at once. He'd been doing it since the front steps of Potter's End. What do you want from me? Draco asked. Nothing you haven't already given, Harry said. The warning before the Wisengamot session. Your father's cooperation. That's already substantial. He paused. Going forward, if you see something I need to know, tell me. If you have a skill that's useful, I'll use it. If you want a place in what I'm building, there'll be one. He held Draco's gaze. None of that is conditional on you being something you're not. It's conditional on you being honest. Draco looked at him with an expression that was, for perhaps the first time in their 7 years of history, entirely unguarded. You're going to win, Draco said. Not flattery. An assessment. Yes, Harry said. You're that certain. I'm not certain about the shape of it or the cost of it, Harry said honestly. But yes. We're going to win. Draco nodded slowly, and stood up, and left the library with a different quality of movement than he'd had coming in, less careful, less arranged, lighter in some way that was difficult to name and probably wouldn't last perfectly but had been genuinely arrived at. Harry watched him go, then went back to his work. The letter from Voldemort on Saturday morning was not 2 words. It was a full page, written in the same precise hand, and it was the most interesting piece of correspondence Harry had received in his life, which was saying something given recent weeks. He read it alone, in his father's study in Somerset, with the morning sun coming through the old glass and Calidulch on the desk beside him. It began without greeting. You are not what I expected. Neither was your mother. I find that I have significantly undervalued the Potter line for 2 decades, which is an error I attribute not to poor intelligence but to a fundamental misreading of what intelligence means when applied to people. I studied the bloodlines. I missed the individuals. The Pendragon claim is legitimate. I have had it verified independently through channels you cannot have anticipated. I am telling you this because I do not respect pretending otherwise, and I have found, increasingly, that the only conversations worth having are the honest ones. You have made 4 moves in the past 2 weeks that I would not have predicted and 2 that I would not have made myself. The King's Peace is particularly elegant. Not because of its tactical utility, which is real but limited, but because of what it communicates about your understanding of the war's actual nature. You understand that this is not primarily a military conflict. It is a conflict about legitimacy. About who has the right to define the framework that everyone else operates within. I have held that right, in practice, for 20 years. You are proposing to take it from me not by force but by superior claim. I want you to understand something clearly, I am not going to stop. The Horcruxes make that impossible, and you do not yet know enough about them to threaten them effectively, though I expect you are working on it. What I am offering is this, a ceasefire of sufficient duration for you to understand the full scope of what you have inherited, because I believe you will find, in the process, that the picture is more complicated than you currently believe it to be. I am not afraid of you. But I am, interested. That is rarer than fear, and you should know it. You are the first person I have written to as an equal in 40 years. I suggest you do not waste the opportunity. TMR. Harry read it twice. Then he sat with it, really sat with it, giving it the full weight of his attention rather than the immediate reflexive response. It was extraordinary. Not in the flattering sense. In the sense that it was a sophisticated, honest, genuinely complex piece of communication from a man who had murdered hundreds of people and split his soul into fragments and was currently conducting an active insurgency against magical Britain, and who was also, demonstrably, a person of exceptional intelligence who had enough self-awareness to recognize a superior move when he encountered one and enough ego to want the person who'd made it to know that he'd recognized it. The Horcruxes. He'd mentioned them himself. He knew Harry didn't know enough about them yet. Which meant either he was testing what Harry knew, baiting a response that would reveal his level of information, or he was, for some incomprehensible reason, genuinely flagging the gap in Harry's knowledge. Harry thought about that for a long time. Then he found Hermione. She was in the kitchen with a cup of tea and 3 open books and the contained urgency of someone who had woken up with a problem and couldn't put it down. She looked up when Harry came in, and something in his face made her set down her cup. "What?" she said. He passed her the letter. She read it. He watched her face, the progression from focused reading through shocked recalibration to something that was bright and urgent and slightly afraid. "He told you about the Horcruxes himself," she said. "He told me I don't know enough about them." Which is both true and useful. "He might know that we've been researching, he doesn't," Harry said. "I'd have seen it in the tone. This is him being, I don't know what to call it. Honest? With himself, at least. He knows the war is changing shape and he's trying to understand what the new shape is." He looked at her. "He's not offering a genuine ceasefire. He's buying time to figure out what I know and what I'm planning. But the Horcrux reference is real. He actually mentioned them." "Because he thinks you can't act on it yet," Hermione said. "Yes. And he's partially right. We know they exist. We know there are multiple. We don't know how many, which ones, or where." He looked at her. "That changes today." Hermione looked at him steadily. "Dumbledore knows," she said. "He's been researching it for years." "I know. And today he tells us all of it." Harry held her gaze. "Everything. No managed disclosure. No deciding I can only hear part of it. Everything." She nodded. "I'll start on the independent research track while you meet with him. Between both sources, we'll have the full picture by tonight," Harry said. He wrote back to Voldemort. This took longer than the previous replies, because this one required precision. He wasn't going to engage with the flattery or the frame of being addressed as an equal. That was a manipulation, an attempt to establish a relationship of dialogue that implied mutual legitimacy. He wasn't going to reject it with anger. That was exactly the emotional response that made people say more than they meant. He was going to be accurate. "Your assessment of the war's nature is correct. You understand legitimacy better than most of your followers. That makes you more dangerous than them and also more isolated, because understanding a concept clearly enough to use it means you can't stop yourself from seeing its full implications, including the ones that apply to you. You have legitimate power. You do not have legitimate claim. That distinction has mattered for 900 years and I intend to make it matter again. The Horcruxes. You raised them. I'll tell you plainly, I know they exist and I'm going to destroy them. I'll let you decide what to do with that information. There will be no ceasefire. Not because I'm unwilling to find solutions that avoid unnecessary death, I am actively trying to find them, but because a ceasefire requires good faith, and you demonstrated in your letter that your interest is intelligence gathering rather than genuine pause. I don't hold that against you. It's rational. It's also transparent. You are the most capable person I have ever opposed and you are going to lose. Not because of prophecy. Because the thing you want, to live forever, to be beyond consequence, to be unkillable, requires you to be less than fully alive, and you've been paying that cost for so long that you've stopped noticing what it's taken from you. The parts of you that would recognize the limitation are gone. I'm not interested in your death. I'm interested in ending what you started. If there is ever a moment when you want those to be the same thing, write to me. I'll respond honestly. HJP. He sealed it and sent it, and felt, when the owl left, not the tight satisfaction of a point scored but something quieter, the honest sorrow of recognizing the full scope of what Voldemort was, which was not simply evil, was something more tragic than that, and the clear certainty that the tragedy didn't change what had to be done. The meeting with Dumbledore that afternoon was the most important conversation Harry had ever had in the headmaster's office. He walked in, sat down, looked at the old man, and said, "Tell me everything you know about the Horcruxes. Today. All of it." And Dumbledore did. It took 2 hours. The full picture, everything the headmaster had gathered through years of careful research, every confirmed Horcrux and suspected one, the logic of Voldemort's creation timeline, the memories he'd been collecting, the destruction of the ring, the damaged hand still wrapped in a glamour charm that he dropped at Harry's request with the quiet willingness of someone who has decided to be fully honest and is following it through. Harry listened to all of it. When it was done he sat quietly for a moment, organizing what he'd heard into the structure that his mind had gotten better at producing over the past 2 weeks, the map of it, the operational logic, the sequence. 6, Harry said. I believe so, yes. Possibly 7, including me, Harry said. The office went very still. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression of someone who has been carrying a terrible thing for a long time and has just been relieved of it, not because the thing is gone but because someone else finally knows its weight. I suspected, Dumbledore said. I did not know with certainty. But you suspected. Harry kept his voice level. For how long? Several years. A pause. The scar. The connection to Voldemort's mind. The Parseltongue. The way the killing curse, he stopped. I'm sorry, Harry. Harry held the information and turned it over. A fragment of Voldemort's soul, lodged in him since infancy. The implication of what destroying that particular Horcrux would require. He understood the shape of it immediately. He suspected Dumbledore had known he would, which was why the headmaster looked the way he did. Is there any other way? Harry asked. I have been attempting to determine that for 3 years, Dumbledore said. I have not found one. However, he held up one slightly damaged hand. I had not been working with the resources that are now available to us. Your mother's research. The Pendragon magic. The amplification ward. He looked at Harry carefully. Lily understood blood-based protection in ways I have not fully mapped. It is possible, not certain, but possible, that the answer lies in her work. Then that's what we're working on, Harry said. He didn't spiral. He didn't freeze. He sat with it for exactly the amount of time required to acknowledge the full weight of what it might mean, and then he straightened in the chair. There are 5 others to find and destroy first, he said. In the meantime, I need to be alive and functional. So we work the problem. He looked at Dumbledore. My mother's notes. Tonight, you and Hermione and I go through every relevant page. Yes, Dumbledore said. And this information stays in the 3 of us for now. Not the full inner circle, not yet. When I understand the shape of it better, when I know what we're actually dealing with, I'll decide who else needs to know. You're protecting them, Dumbledore said quietly. I'm being strategic, Harry said. There's a difference. He stood. Though yes. Both. He walked to the door, then stopped. One more thing, he said, without turning. The Peveril cloak. The original. You had it when I was born. Yes, Dumbledore said. You knew it was the Master Cloak. The Pendragon inheritance. Yes. Why did you give it to me as a Christmas present in first year? A long pause. Because it was yours, Dumbledore said. I could hold it in trust, I could convince myself the reasons for keeping it were strategic, but the truth was simpler than that. It was yours and I knew it. Another pause. Some things I got right. Harry nodded, once. Some things you got right, he agreed. He walked out of the office and down the spiral staircase and through the corridor, and the castle made its sounds around him, the comfortable old familiar sounds of Hogwarts, the place he'd come to as an 11-year-old with no knowledge of who he was, and had gradually, haltingly, incompletely, been figuring out ever since. He was 16. He had a war to finish. He had a fragment of someone else's soul to deal with and a mother's research notes that might contain the answer and an inner circle of people he trusted completely. He had 22 houses and 1 crown and a sword that felt like purpose. He had Voldemort's honest assessment that he was the most legitimate claimant to power in magical Britain, which was worth something in ways that went beyond the political. He had the Horcrux information, which was difficult and significant and changed the timeline. He had, most importantly, the very specific calm of someone who has looked at the worst possible version of what they're dealing with and has decided to solve it rather than be defined by it. That evening, Harry stood at the entrance of Potter's End in the last of the summer light. Inside, Hermione and Dumbledore had been working for 3 hours on Lily Potter's research notes, and Harry could hear them, their voices carrying from the study, the sound of pages turning, occasional sharp intake of breath from Hermione when she found something significant. The sound of 2 extraordinary minds finding each other's wavelength over the documented work of a third. Ron was in the kitchen with Neville, the chessboard between them and a pot of tea going cold because they'd forgotten about it in the intensity of a game that Neville was, Harry knew, beginning to genuinely threaten Ron with in ways that were visibly delighting both of them. Luna was in the garden, which she'd started tending in the evenings, not formally, just wandering through it with the particular attention she paid to living things, coaxing the enchanted beds into new arrangements that turned out, every time, to be both beautiful and unexpected. Ginny was on the front steps, and when Harry came out she moved over without looking up from the letter she was writing, family correspondence. Harry knew, the careful work of staying connected to the burrow without saying more than was safe. He sat beside her. The West Country evening was warm and still and smelled of the garden and old stone and coming summer. The sky went from blue to gold to the first pale suggestion of stars. We found something in the notes, Harry said. He hadn't meant to say it, it came out of the same impulse that made him tell Ginny things he hadn't planned to tell anyone. She looked up from her letter. Her eyes were very steady in the evening light. About the scar, she said. He looked at her. How did you know? Because of the way you've been thinking for the past week, she said simply. Something's been sitting behind everything else. Something you haven't wanted to name yet. She held his gaze. Is there a way out? We're working on it, he said. That's not a no. No, he said. It's not a no. She looked at him for a moment, long enough to understand that he was telling her the truth, that he was neither performing confidence nor hiding fear, that he had looked at the thing and was working on it with the same focused pragmatism that he brought to everything else. Then she looked back at her letter and kept writing, and her shoulder was warm against his, and the evening continued around them. Potter, she said, after a moment. Weasley, he said. You're going to need to stop calling me by my last name at some point. He looked at her sideways. The corner of her mouth was doing something. I know, he said. She kept writing. Just noting it, she said. He let the almost smile happen. Noted, he said. The first star appeared. Inside, he could hear Hermione's voice rise with the particular excited sharpness that meant she'd found something, and Dumbledore's lower voice responding, and the sound of pages turning faster. He'd need to go back in soon. There was work to do, and the work was important, and the work was going to continue for a long time and cost things he couldn't fully predict yet. He knew that. He sat with it the way he'd sat with the river in Northumberland, not denying it, not suppressing it, just letting it be what it was while he remained what he was, someone who had decided, clear-headed and without drama, to do what needed to be done. He was 16 years old. He was the heir of 22 noble and most ancient houses. He was the true king of magical Britain by blood and right and law, older than anyone alive could fully remember. He was the boy who had collapsed in a bank 2 weeks ago and woken up with the full weight of his history for the first time. He was also, and remained, just Harry, the one who put his friends first and ran toward things rather than away and made decisions that surprised people who'd been managing him by assuming those decisions were above his ceiling. The ceiling, it turned out, was considerably higher than anyone had planned for. He stood up from the front steps. "Tell the others I'll be in the study," he said. Ginny waved her quill without looking up. He walked back into his family's house, through the hallway with the photographs and the portraits, up the stairs, to the study where the 3 most formidable magical intellects he had access to were building something new out of his mother's work and the oldest magic in Britain. He pulled up his father's chair and sat down. The crown was in the vault below, still waiting. Not yet. But the gap between not yet and now was narrowing, and he could feel it closing the way you can feel a door about to open, the latch shifting, the pressure building, the hinge turning. He opened his mother's notebook to the page Hermione was pointing at. He started to read.